Thank you all for being here today. I know it's fun to catch up with folks, but we'd love to stay on task. I'm going to invite Janine Gordon to come and do our land acknowledgement before we start this day.
Tatsmami, aha, niloitsa at apine kitats. Inimoniktwash, so it's fu. Good morning. It's good that you're all here this morning. My name is People of the Wild Carrot. My English name is Janine Gordon. I am an enrolled tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I'm the 5th great-granddaughter of Walla Walla Chief Pio Pio Mox Mox, the 6th great-granddaughter of Walla Walla Chief Old Joseph, our Nez Perce Chief Old Joseph. I am the Special Assistant to the President for Native American Outreach here at Whitman College. Welcome to this 2-day learning session called The Search for Safety, Building a Resilient Learning Community. This event is hosted by Whitman College and is located within the homelands of the Walla Walla, Cayuse, and Umatilla tribes. We are the 3 tribes that form the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. The Walla Walla and Umatilla tribes lived in the Walla Walla Valley and Lower Columbia River areas on both the Oregon and Washington sides of the river. The Cayuse tribe traveled to and from the Columbia River and major rivers of the region, and predominantly lived along the tributary river valleys and foothills of the Blue Mountains, from the upper Walla Walla River to the Deschutes River in Central Oregon, extending over to the eastern side of the Blue Mountains. Interconnected, our 3 tribes lived and flourished around the confluences of the Yakima Snake and Walla Walla rivers along the Columbia River. We connected with other plateau tribes along the Columbia River Gorge and beyond for trade and other economic and family-related interests. Our tribes were part of a larger population of Sahaptin-speaking people of southeastern and central Washington, northeastern Oregon, and western Idaho. Our ancestors lived and thrived on millions of acres of land prior to colonial settlements here. We persevered through colonization and war. We thrive today by continuously protecting and practicing our rights that are declared in the Walla Walla Cayuse and Umatilla Treaty of 1855, a binding agreement with the United States government that was negotiated on our behalf by approximately 5,000 of our chiefs and tribal leaders at the Walla Walla Treaty Council. It is believed that by many that Whitman College sits on a portion of the land where the Treaty Council took place. So today, we honor and respect tribal elders, both past and present. We honor our Indigenous people who continue our culture, language, and heritage now, and those who will continue our culture, language, and heritage tomorrow. I am grateful to see all of you here today. I am honored to share this land acknowledgement with you and welcome you to these Community Days learning sessions. Katsiao yao, thank you.
I'm so excited to be here. I jokingly said standing room only, so today was sold out. We had a couple folks who canceled last minute, but I'm happy that you all made it today. I am Nadine Steckline. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director for Internship Programs in the CCEC, the Career and Community Engagement Center. I get to work with wonderful folks such as Janine, Mary Rashko, Natasha, and Dr. Johnson on this subcommittee called Community Learning Days, and we are part of the Inclusive Excellence Council here at Whitman College. For those of you who may not be familiar with Community Learning Days, they provide a crucial role in supporting learning for faculty and staff. That's why you all are here today. Each semester, we come together to prepare for the return and arrival of our students. And so today and other community learning days are about staying attuned to the changing needs of Whitman College students. And it's about building our collective capacity to advance in inclusive excellence here at Whitman College. Your presence today and tomorrow and future here is pivotal to what we're doing here at Whitman, and your involvement is truly invaluable. Thank you for being here. And we are about to embark on this journey to make Whitman a more resilient and supportive educational community. And I'm happy to be a part of that as well. And now we'll introduce Mary Rashko, who will introduce our presenters for today.
Thanks, Nadine. I want to say thank you to my colleagues who work on community learning days for welcoming this particular idea of what we would do in January. As the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, we have an initiative this year that I'm calling Teaching and Learning Now to try to do professional learning that is responsive to experiences we had in the pandemic and things that we heightened our consciousness of. So clearly trauma-informed education, the way that we show up with each other on account of what we've experienced in the past, is something that was relevant before COVID, and it was relevant before our heightened consciousness of racialized violence in 2020. But it was something that we became more attentive to the need to think about this as educators. Here in Walla Walla, we are extremely fortunate to have a local organization that has a wide national presence in doing education about trauma and about how to build more resilient communities. So I'm really excited today to welcome our colleagues from the Community Resilience Initiative. So Rick Griffin, who we'll be getting to know throughout these sessions, and also Becky Turner, who some of you may know as the former executive director of the STAR Project, another really important organization in our community. So Rick is an educator by training. He is a Walla Wallan who has recently found warmer weather in Arizona. Maybe he gets to escape the coming single-digit temperatures we're all going to navigate. But Rick, I really like to think of his work as such a key conduit of the kind of things that happen in higher education, and then the way that our lives play out in community. That he is a voracious reader of science related to neuroscience, of social science research, and then takes that out as a translator to places that people can really put that into action, so that academic research has profound impacts on the communities in which people live. So I'm so grateful that we're able to learn from you today. And I just want to hand this over to Rick, who will let us know more about his work and their organization as he goes. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm coming back from holiday break and so is my voice. I need to warm it up just a little bit. Are you guys okay playing a game with me? So if you're willing, only if you're willing, if you could stand up, and if you can, stand up for me. We're gonna play a quick game. This is a game you've probably played hundreds of times before, maybe not recently, maybe recently, who knows? But the game is called Simon Says, okay? And just so there's no identity crisis, I'm Simon and you're not. So if you do a Simon Says, please remain standing. If you do not do a Simon Says, please feel free to have a seat. The only difference in the game that you probably played before and the game we're gonna play today is I want you to be successful. So if there's anything you need in order to be successful, all you have to do is ask, okay? So is there anything anybody needs in order to be successful? First of all, is there anybody who hasn't played the game before? Everybody understands the game? Anybody need anything? Ready to start? Let's try it. Okay, Simon Says hands up. Okay, hands down. Put your hands down, have a seat. Simon didn't say so. Okay, hands down. Simon still didn't say so. Okay, Simon says hands down. Simon says hands on your shoulders, Simon says hands on your head, Simon says hands on your shoulders, Simon says hands on your knees. Where's your knees? If your hands aren't on your knees, you're not in this game. Okay, hands up. Okay, Simon didn't say that. We didn't have a seat. Okay, how many people? We don't have very many people in here. Okay, those of you who are in, come down. We're gonna have some fun with you. We got some room right in here. Yeah. Simon didn't say, so go ahead and have a seat. Wow, we were not very good at that game. So what was the challenge of that game? Anybody want to share with me? What was the challenge of the game? Yes.
The speed at which it was hard to understand when you would put that in.
Okay, so if I would have slowed down, would you have done better?
Yeah.
Okay, why didn't you ask for that? I said if you needed anything, just ask, right?
Trying to keep up with your direction.
Yeah, what were some of the other challenges? Yes.
I forgot the simple premise of the entire game.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, when we started, we were like, what are we doing here? And so did you look at me to look for direction? That didn't help, did it? Sorry about that. So my visual cues did not line up with my verbal cues, didn't they?
No.
Yeah, and that became challenging for some. But I really want to ask you the question, why do you think we didn't ask for what we needed in order to be successful? Why didn't we ask? Anybody want to offer a thought? We got a thought. Oh, we got a box, got to wait for the box to come up there. We're gonna get Mary moving today, so there we go.
I don't know about anyone else, so I don't want to speak for folks,
Sure.
but I was not taught to like ask for what I needed until my adult life.
Yeah.
So like trying to practice that can be a struggle at times, and I'm always having to like remind myself.
Mhm.
And I don't think I'm alone in that sense, but like I said, I don't want to speak for anyone else, because maybe y'all had some really nice parents. Love my parents
I
though.
still didn't learn that after what I wanted.
At the beginning, I mean, I knew what the game was. It was fairly simple. But then as the game progressed and it went quickly, I didn't want to interrupt the flow and say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Because then it would have said, hey, I didn't say, Simon, say, put your hand up for a
Oh.
question. So I guess interrupting the flow or knowing when there was an opportunity to ask.
Such polite people, I love it. Yeah, yeah, any other thoughts about why we didn't ask for what we needed? Yeah. We got a box coming for you.
I'm gonna spill some coffee with it.
I think we just didn't know what we needed from the outset.
Mhm. Yeah, and that could be problematic. Yeah. Did I see a hand go up in my peripheral over here somewhere?
I was gonna say that.
Yeah, okay, good, very good, very good. Yes, let's,
I think there's this thing where like you told us that we could, but we don't know you. Like we don't trust you yet.
say that loud, that was scary.
Sorry, I don't mean, by the end of the day, like.
You're right, and so when we don't trust people, it gets hard to ask for what we need to be successful. Interesting, yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, can I move this up to the top here?
I think it's because when we ask for something that we need, it means that we have to be vulnerable.
And you weren't willing to be vulnerable? Was that part of that, or am I taking a leap with that?
I think that it's hard to be vulnerable, and I think it's hard to be your authentic self, especially when you're at work.
Yeah, and one of the things that it hadn't come up, but I think that this could be part of it, is that you knew how to play Simon Says, and Simon doesn't really want you to be successful, right? In your experiences, does Simon want you to be successful? So many were like, well, that's how the game's played. I'm supposed to not. And that could become complicated. And that's really my point, is that you played the game based on all your experiences, based on what your parents told you about interrupting, about whether, all those things were part of our experience, and that's how we entered the game. And can you imagine how difficult it is when our experience of our past doesn't line up well with what's happening in the present? And I think that's really what this topic today is about, is like what happens when we've got folks who have an experience that doesn't always match well with what's happening in the present. There can be some complications. And I don't want to leave you in a negative space with that game, but I want to help you to see that that's really normal. That's what we do. And if we could do it again, do you think you would do better? Do you think you would ask for what you needed to be successful? Some say no, some no. Why do we think that is? We want success is an okay thing, isn't it? It's not against the regulations here, women, to be successful. Sure, it's not. But that's why I love doing that game to introduce this topic, because so often we don't recognize that our history, our experience still plays out today. It has a great impact in what happens with us today. And when we talk about student success, for example, their success may be hampered, may have barriers simply because of what they experience. And if we can understand that better, I think we can all be collectively more successful. So that's our hope for today, is to really have a better understanding of the impact of people's experience on their showing up in our spaces today. And I've got some experiences that led me to today as well. And so I want to introduce myself a little bit, but also wanted to give the opportunity for my colleague to share a little bit and introduce herself. But although I do most of the speaking today, it's not. I am supported in a lot of ways by a team, and one of my team members is here today. Natasha, can I get the cue down here to Becky? Becky, you want to share a little bit about yourself and your role a little bit?
Certainly. My name is Becky Turner, and I am the Director of Community Engagement here in Walla Walla for the Community Resilience Initiative. I focus on our community of practice, and so Rick does the training, and I kind of do a training aftercare component that helps people put the principles that we learn into practice. So after today and tomorrow's session, if this is something that really resonates with you, my recommendation would be to reach out to me. I've got monthly community of practice meetings. I'm more than happy to meet with people on campus, off campus. Love going to the patisserie. And just talk about how we can further a trauma-informed agenda within our professional spheres.
Thanks. And my lovely partner at home called Becky Bima, because she has to come in after the storm. And try to make things whole again in communities. And so I certainly appreciate that role. And for me, I want to introduce myself a little bit. You know my name, but my journey is really important to this topic and to where we're going. And education facilities is a huge part of that. You know, thankfully, I have had an opportunity to be in Walla Walla or in the area for about 25 years, but it started for me, obviously, much longer before that. Born and raised in a place called Flint, Michigan. And most of us are probably somewhat familiar with Flint. A couple of years ago, it was big on the news about the water crisis. Well, the water crisis still exists. We just don't hear about it in the news anymore. But that's the kind of area that I was born into. And back then, it kind of dates myself a little bit, but it was just prior to the signing across our country of the Civil Rights Act. And when we put ink to that paper, did it make everything perfect all of a sudden? No, we still had some problems with it. But so I was growing up in that era, and it had what they called forced desegregation. The idea was, okay, we got to treat people the same, but schools weren't abiding by that. We had to bring in the National Guard, for goodness sake, and to kind of force desegregation. And so part of that plan that they had, especially in urban communities, was to have schools kind of segregate, force desegregation, say, even if you live in this catchment area, you don't all get to go to this school, that you have to be forced to another school, so there can be some equity in a sense inside the school. So we had a school in my neighborhood that my older brothers got a chance to go to, but I didn't get a chance to go to. I got bused across town. And as a 5-year-old kid, I didn't have the concept well enough of school to know exactly what I should do. So I was put on a bus, went across town, and when I got off that bus, I did what a 5-year-old would do best. I played. That's what I did. I thought I was pretty good at playing back then. And so I looked for other kids who were in my neighborhood that came along, and we played, and we waited for the next bus that was going back to our community. We jumped in that bus and we went home. And I did that for about 6 straight years. I don't remember going inside of a classroom. I don't remember meeting any teachers. But thankfully, my parents had this great idea to get us out of Flint, Michigan. And we were headed to the promised land of California. I think everybody was headed to California back in the early 70s. So we were headed to California, but we ran out of money in a place called Casper, Wyoming. And I don't know how many of you know about Casper, Wyoming, but it's a little different than Flint, Michigan. And so here I am, an inner city kid dropped off in the middle of Casper, Wyoming, but now I'm 12 years old. And going to school, I thought school was kind of cool because that's where you went to hang out and play. And so, well, go meet some new kids and hang out and play. And there were some kids playing basketball right in front of the school. And I thought, well, I like basketball. And I made some friends. And all of a sudden this bell rings. And then they put the basketball down and started walking in the building. I'm like, well, where are you going? It's like, we were in the middle of a good game here. But I didn't want to ruffle any feathers, so I thought, I'll go in the building like everybody else. So I walked in the building and they were going in these little rooms, so I picked a room to go into. It wasn't the right room. Then they said, I'm sorry, you're not on our list here. And they called it a homeroom, so we'll find your homeroom. And I'm like, yes, that's what I want, a room that reminds me of home. I'm thinking, well, that's where all the other black kids are, 'cause I hadn't seen any yet, right? So I'm thinking, they must be all in that homeroom. So I said, yes, send me to that room. So I walked into that room, still nobody looked like me, but I'm 12, I'm thinking I'll make friends with whoever. But you know how the desks are all in a row, and because I'm already late, the only desk available was the one in the far back corner. But greeted me kindly, oh, you're Rick, yeah, well, there's your desk. And I said, well, how am I supposed to make friends and talk? Because everybody's facing the other direction. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'll tell you when you need to talk. And I'm like, you can't make friends when somebody tells you when you need to talk. And so I'm pretty confused. I thought, yeah, okay, Casper's a little different place. I'm gonna be okay. But I ran into one of those teachers who would point to you and then ask you the question. You ever had that? I mean, and I guess being the new kid, of course, the finger comes to me. Rick, who killed John F. Kennedy? It wasn't me. Why you blame me for that? I wouldn't know who that guy when that happened. But she didn't like that answer. She did what all great educators do, they send you down to the principal's office. And like all great principals do, they call your parents and, hey, well, your son has a malign countenance. My dad said, well, he must have stolen that. I didn't buy that for him. No. I mean, he's got a bad attitude. The teacher asked him who killed John F. Kennedy, and he said it wasn't him. My dad said, well, the boy said he didn't do it. He didn't do it. So it's good to have support, people support in those days, but things was very, very chaotic for me, and trying to navigate that system was a little challenging. And I realized that there was something going on that I wasn't a part of, that I didn't fit in. They had education, they could read, and I couldn't, and I knew that'd be problematic. And so I remember, 12, and I want to fit in, and I remember getting a friend, and I said, hey, you gotta help me out. This is embarrassing. I do not want that to happen where a teacher points at me and asks me a question I don't know the answer to. So you've got to give me an answer. He said, well, it doesn't work like that. And I said, no, I can make it work. Here's how I simple mind work. I was like, no, I can really make this work because we have TV. It's the first time in my life we had TV, right? And so and I watched TV and like the news. Back then, like there was only 3 channels, and I think one of them like had letters like UHF or something like that. But watch the news, and I thought if I could talk like that guy on the news, I think I could gain people's respect. Because I didn't grow up talking like this. I learned to talk like this so people like you would listen to me. And so I thought I can learn to talk like that guy in the news. And then Andy Griffith. Y'all remember Andy Griffith? Everybody in town listened to Andy, right? Andy was cool. Andy would put his hands behind his back all the time, and he'd kind of sway back and forth. And he always had a rock in front of me. He'd kick, and so he'd kind of kick that rock, and he'd say, And as soon as he'd do that, everybody would kind of lean in and listen. I'm like, yeah, I could do that. I mean, I couldn't do the whole Southern twang thing, but I could do that. So I said, you just give me an answer, because I watched the news and Andy, I'll make it work. He gave me an answer. Now, this was almost 50 years ago, but I still remember this answer. It's great because as soon as the teacher would point to me, I'd stand up and I'd put my hand behind my back and I'd sway back and forth like Andy. I'd pretend like I kicked that rocket, and then I'd say, And in my best newscaster voice, I would say, well, that's a very big question. That's what I care to be simplistic about, because nothing with main thrust of the thesis and any viable explanation goes behind the adequate principal issue. And the teacher would look at me and say, okay. Nadine, what do you think 4 + 4 is? Or whatever. But there was this dynamic of when people felt good about you, they gave you a little benefit of the doubt. And that gave me a chance for people to feel differently about me. And I've lived, with a lot of shame and having to do that and all that. And I totally get that. But at the time, as a 12-year-old, I didn't know anything else to do. I desperately wanted to belong. So I was willing to do that. And I had this answer. And I loved it. It was a great answer. And I remember, the time I got to college and I could read by then, and I was taking an essay question test, and didn't know the answer, so I went back to my old question and wrote it down. That's a very big question. I think it was just the teacher gave me partial credit for it. So I'm like, and I thought I learned something about how to kind of navigate a world where when you don't fit in. And when things happen, it's like, I get it, there's lots of, pressure on folks to achieve and do things, but, it was challenging for me because I was so different. But that was my secret. I didn't want anybody to know that. I tried desperately hard. I mean, they figured it out eventually. They gave me these tests, and I remember the very first IQ test that I had. You're back in the days of the number 2 pencil, fill in the circle kind of thing, and they didn't ask me if I could read or write. They gave me a pencil and a piece of paper. And the 12-year-old kid who couldn't read or write, I thought I drew some pretty good pictures. You only had the margins to work with, right? So it's like I was doing my best, and the little 8 timer goes off, and I hand over again, and then, well, why didn't you answer the questions? And I said, well, nobody asked me any questions. And they started figuring out that, oh, maybe you can't read. And so they gave me another test that was more appropriate, age appropriate, and well, it wasn't age appropriate, but at least developmentally appropriate of saying, and they used to give this maybe preschoolers when you can't read, but they give you pictures, and you're supposed to tell them what's wrong with the picture. And they were to assess your IQ based on how well you were able to see what was wrong with the picture. And what's surprising to me, that this particular test was still in circulation about 15 years ago. And we're talking about an event that, decades and decades ago. But, and one of the pictures was a picture of a cow. Okay? Now, inner city kid, Flint, Michigan, I'd never seen a cow a day in my life. And the only thing that I could connect, it looked like a fat dog. That's all I mean, it's a fat dog. I guess if it lost weight, it probably would stand better because it looked like it was wobbling on those little knee. I didn't know. And I was supposed to notice it didn't have the hooves, the split hooves. Okay. And then there was a picture of a chicken. Now, I knew it was a bird. I've seen birds, doves, mostly doves, pigeons, and you see a lot of pigeons. And in parks, and I remember that seeing a pigeon would always land on its shadow. And I always thought that was pretty cool. And so when I saw this thing that looked like a bird, and I looked and said, it didn't have looks like it was on the ground, but it didn't have a shadow. And I'm thinking, man, I am brilliant. They're gonna love me. They're gonna think I'm the smartest kid ever. And I said, yep, that's a bird and it doesn't have a shadow. And they said, nope, that's a chicken. And I'm like, no. So I know chicken. And my grandmother's chicken, church's chicken. I was like, I know chicken, that's not chicken. And I was supposed to notice it didn't have the spur in the back of the leg. So I failed this test miserably. And then back then, there was a school for the mentally retarded that they sent me to. Of course, my family made a fuss a little bit, and after a couple of weeks, they were able to get me back into a mainstream school with just some support and education. But it was hard trying to navigate that world. And what's interesting is, again, close to 5 decades later, I can still feel a little anxiety when I'm in a school. And especially when I'm around educators. And I don't know, you don't know, you're not even expecting anything. You're certainly not, well, you might be grading me, but I still feel that anxiety. I still feel that rush of, having to prove myself and wanting to be something. And so when I was able to start my joy, was thinking about, I want to make sure that as few kids as possible have the same experience I did. So I left college, I was committed to I want to, build a big house and have kids come from the inner city and raise them and help them, and teach them to read and all those types of things. And so I came out to this area. I was in Seattle right after college. And so I came out here, the land was a little cheaper. And my dream was I was going to start a nonprofit organization and have kids of that nature. And had this idea and was talking about this. And there was a particular farmer, an orchardist, lived outside of town. He came and he said, I've got a similar dream. He said, well, let's maybe we can get some folks together and we'll call it a board meeting, our first board meeting. And he showed up with these architectural tubes and everything with this huge design. He says, here's what I'm thinking about. And I'm thinking, I don't have any money to do any of that. I'm thinking of a small house with a couple extra bedrooms. And he showed up to the next meeting with a check, $7.2 million. And he gave me 400 acres right where the Snake River, here outside of Prescott, Washington. And we built a facility called a Jubilee Leadership Academy. And I had kids come from all over the country. And I was there for about 25 years. And so that was my life's work, is my dream, to help kids overcome some of those challenges. And the hardest part for me is that there were far too many. And it's like that opportunity that you think that, gosh, there's all these people that need help and you're only able to help a fraction of them. And I remember going to the board and saying, you hear kids that they would leave the program in the state of Washington at the age of 18. You can't have minors and they're no longer minors and they can't stay in minor care and all those things. So they'd always call back and say, Mr. Rick, I know what to do. And one of the young men, Jermaine was his name, from Chicago. This is actually during Christmas break. He finally got a chance to go home back to Chicago for Christmas break. So excited because he had a week off. After 2 days, he called me and says, Mr. Rick, I need to come home. I said, well, you are home. I said, no, I need to come back to Jubilee. He said, Jermaine, what's going on? I said, I don't know how to live here anymore. So literally, I walked down to the corner store and he said, a car rolled up on him. And ask him where he's from. And he said, I forgot that you just can't walk down the street like that. He said, so I lied to him and said, I'm visiting. And so they left him alone, but he was just trembling. And he said, I gotta go back. And so we started being concerned, like, well, what are we doing? I mean, they're safe and they felt comfortable on campus, but when they go back home, things haven't changed. So I told my board, so we gotta do something different. And they said, Rick, maybe you can cast this message a little larger. Maybe you can go out around the country and tell people about what you're learning, about how to help people who have some experiences that are getting in the way of their learning opportunities. And that's why I ran into Terry Gorilla, who was the founder of what at the time was called the Children's Resilience Initiative. And we agreed to, let's build this dream together. And see what it's like to be able to do that. And that's what I get a chance to do today, is I get to travel across the country, talking about the opportunity to say, what can we do to understand people better? And help connect some of the struggles in their experience of what's happening today in order for them to succeed. And so this is not just a job for me, this is a lifestyle. I mean, if you ever see me again, I wear the same colors every single day. And I started this one as a Jubilee because I realized that there's a lot of things people can get triggered off of. And so I'm going to try to control the things that I can. And my clothing was something I can control. And so I started doing that thinking I am sold out and 100% committed to a lifestyle that says we've got to find a way to help people whose experiences may have some struggles. So I know that's a long introduction, but I think it's an important one to understand that this is a journey for me, but it's a real lifelong journey. And in this journey, there's one thing I have to say, that and there's nothing like being in front of a large room that makes you want to confess. One of my guilty pleasures. I'm almost embarrassed to say so, but I watched every episode of the first 2 years of Grey's Anatomy. I did. I haven't seen one in about 16 years. I haven't get to do that to you, but here it is. But I didn't miss anything back in those early years, and because at the time I was still in Seattle, and and so I was thinking, well, this is going to be great. But there was a particular episode right at the very first of the second season. Meredith Grey, the lead character, she's having some romantic feelings of Dr. McDreamy, but he was still having some drama with his ex-wife. And so she's sitting there and she looks him in the eye, and she has that iconic line. She says, pick me, choose me, love me. And so I love that. And I want to say that every time I'm in a room. Because I want to tell you, there's a lot of trainers that you've probably heard, a lot of people that talk to you. And I know that in your mind, you're kind of comparing me to them. I hope that you can let that go a little bit. Suspend your judgment about what I should sound like, what I should look like, what kind of things I should say. I really do hope you can suspend judgment of that and just pick me. Choose me. Let me be present with me today. Are you willing to do that for me? Because I know I'm not gonna, there's no way that I could really match your expectations of all the wonderful folks that I'm sure that you've heard. But I do have a message I think is important. And I think if you can suspend judgment for just a little bit, I think we can get somewhere. So if you're willing to do that, I think the content that we have today is going to be extremely valuable for you. Because the content, and we're in an appropriate building, we're in the science building. Any science faculty in the room here? Okay, so most people know that science isn't everybody's favorite subject, right? There's never been a science book that's been on the bestseller list, you know, and I get that, but I'm kind of a science geek. The bestsellers are always storybooks, right? So I'm gonna try to tell the science in a story. Because I think the science is so relevant. But I know that if I don't tell it right, you won't stay with me. So you're gonna hear a lot about the science behind trauma, the science behind resilience, and what can we do to really help folks along with that. But hopefully I can communicate in a way that you can understand it a little better. And my other hope is that while we're doing this, that you feel comfortable enough about engaging. I know it's hard. You know, you may not feel like, because I don't know if I can catch the little box here, so I don't want to make a comment, but I want you to try to engage a little bit. Because you're going to learn it best when it's when you're able to say, yeah, but what if? What about this situation? And what about this situation? It's those kind of things that really bring this information out. And I think with the content that we're sharing in the end of the day, especially if you're able to jump in and join me tomorrow, I think your ability to connect with folks in order to help them to feel safe, we titled this that search for safety. I think when we start to understand that people are on a search for safety, and when we can do certain things to help them to feel safe, we really can give them access to a whole lot of amazing resources within themselves, and that be able to access resources even outside of themselves down that road to success. But if we don't, they're going to spend up all their energy trying to keep themselves safe, which leaves a lot less energy to learn and do all the things that we may want them to do. So that's what this content is about in terms of the agenda. My hope is that we'll have a break about halfway into this, and it gives you a chance to refresh. Because when we come back, I really want to dive deep into what happens inside the brain. That the brain has an amazing capacity to do a lot of things, but its number one responsibility of the brain, it's not to learn, it's to run the body. So run all these systems. I mean, it's got to make sure that the heartbeat is beating at a certain rhythm, you know, and pumping enough blood through the blood vessel. If it pumps too hard and too much blood through blood vessels that don't have the capacity, that's hypertension, that's deadly. If it pumps too little, that's hypotension, that's deadly. It's got to make sure that the lungs are pumping the right amount of oxygen too much oxygen, harmful, too little oxygen, harmful. So the brain's designed, it's to regulate all that. It takes a lot of energy to regulate all those systems. And we don't even have to think about it. When's the last time you thought about whether your liver was producing enough bile? You ever thought about that? You ever sat there and thought, oh, I think it's doing it right now, isn't it? No, we don't have to think about most of these things. Our brain is doing that. And when all those things are going well, it can use a lot more of its resources to do what we would call learning and doing other things. And it can do those things pretty well too, but not as well if it's focusing all of its attention trying to keep the body running, trying to keep the body safe. So some of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of our agenda today. But there's a little framework that I want to start off with. This framework that we've developed to kind of guide this information about the science of trauma and resilience. We talk about that in terms of the KISS framework. Okay, KISS. The framework is knowledge, insight, strategies, and structures. And the importance of this framework, and I'll walk through each of these individually with you, but the K is for knowledge. And the current scientific findings, if we're not really basing things on the current scientific findings, I think we're just taking a guess and we're giving opinions. And you know what happens when folks just start entering their opinions into things. You know, I'm sure you're aware of what happened on campus when we couldn't agree on the science behind vaccinations and those things. When we can't get on the same page with science, there's a lot of division that occurs. So we want to start off with saying, can we get on the same page with the current scientific findings around trauma and around what resilience is and how the brain and impacts the body and all the body's functions. But then something I think is ultimately important in this process of it, what makes it unique to CRI is we have what we call insight. It's insight. When we start thinking about insight, it's understanding a person's experience for a long, and it's a pretty big notion now in, especially in social service communities, the idea that trauma is not about what's wrong with somebody, because this is the big catch line. It's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what happened to you. And an amazing neuroscientist, Dr. Bruce Perry, came along with Oprah, and everybody loves Oprah. And so when she writes a book with Dr. Bruce Perry, everybody loves it. The book's called What Happened to You. And as much as I respect Oprah and Dr. Perry, I don't think it goes deep enough into the science. Because it's not just about what happened to you, it's how you interpreted what happened to you. And that sounds semantic, but that matters. Use the analogy of two conjoined twins. You know what conjoined twins are, right? They share body parts. And if I had, if these two young ladies were my conjoined twins, and I was their father and feeding them lunch, here you go, girls, enjoy. One's gonna say, Dad, that's the best lunch I ever had. The other one might say, why do you always serve her first? Now they're experiencing the same thing, right? They're having the same thing happen, but they're not interpreting it in the same way. And that matters. And I can't just go and say, oh, well, get over it. You know I really love you. They're not gonna respond in the same way. So I think we have to go beyond what's happened to people, because you can't have the same thing happen and experience it in far different ways. We can have siblings from the same household that turn out drastically different because it's how they interpret what happened, not just what happened. And having insight into someone enough to know, how did you interpret what happened? Can be really helpful in this process. And we say that these two, knowledge and insight, have to occur before what we call strategies. And strategies are important. And we want to give you some strategies. Every time, especially with educators, we go in there, so Rick, just give us some strategies. Here's what's going on. Tell us how to work with this. Give us the strategies. And I say, no, I can't. I won't. Without knowledge and insight. Because you will use the wrong strategy. Because we need different strategies all the time. How many of you this morning feel like you need a cup of coffee before you're at your best? Raise your hand if you feel like you need a cup of coffee at your best. Okay. Those who have your hand up, how many of you could use the same cup of coffee right before bedtime? Is that beneficial? No? Only a handful, huh? Only a handful. So even within ourselves, we need a different strategy during the course of the day. You would think it's a great strategy for me to bring you a cup of coffee in the morning, wouldn't you? But that's an awful strategy for many of you to try to bring it to you right before bedtime. So I need to have some knowledge about caffeine and what it does to you, have insight in what it does to you before I start using a strategy. Are you with me on that? So that's why we're going to spend some time talking about the knowledge and how to develop some insight before we start throwing out strategies. Because if you start using strategies without knowledge and insight, you probably will re-traumatize people. And there'll be more harm done. And unfortunately, it just seems like it falls on a certain population. A marginalized population that just has all things heaped up on them already. And that's not okay for me. And so I really want to make sure, let's get the knowledge and insight first before we dive into the strategy. Strategy is important. Don't get me wrong. I think we should be able to have some strategies, but we have to use those with great care, based with knowledge and insight. And then, once we do have that, then we start talking about some structures. Or some might consider it systems. Some might say, okay, now that we've got some strategy, how do we make sure that the structures can continue to support the growth of knowledge and insight and the use of strategies within a structure? It's this framework that we feel that is best able to present the information of the science around trauma and resilience. And so any questions about the framework? So I really want you to understand why some of you might be really impatient with me. Rick, just tell me what to do when this happens. And I can guarantee you, I could tell you, but it would probably be wrong in many different ways. Depending on the time of day, if it was bringing coffee to somebody, and how caffeine affects certain people, because it doesn't affect everybody the same way. You'd be surprised on how different we can be. Question?
On
Can we
that,
get you the box somehow?
on the KISS, it's interesting, it seems like if you've been in a family, you kind of look at some of this framework as,
Some natural things you've done with your children or with, and so that's really cool to think that this is, yeah, that just, this is possibly a natural thing, but when you don't know the people or you're in a classroom and you have students who you don't know their life, you don't know, so it's just very, very interesting and
And I think that is so well said, because it is, there are some things that we will do what we call naturally, but are they really naturally? Or are they what we've learned and what we've learned from our experience? And so if you grew up just like me, you might have some things that we have in common. But if you didn't, those things may not make any sense to you. And it is something that we think as natural to us, but it's not natural to everyone. And that matters. And I think that we are doing a disservice, especially to educators, when we say that it's about what happened to people. Because then we start looking at these things, well, and we'll talk about that a little bit today, with adverse childhood experiences. People who had certain experiences, we just expected certain things that here's what they were gonna be about. That they didn't interpret those experiences in the same way. And so we have to have greater insight into someone. And so as we go through this, we're gonna talk about this in terms of, especially in the knowledge area, the idea called the neurosciences. The neuroscience is a collective of research bases in the area of neuroscience, epigenetics, and case studies, and resilience science. And so when we start looking at this, this will give us the scope of what we call knowledge, to have the current findings in these areas. Yes.
what does case study stand for?
We'll get into that specifically. So we'll jump into these all, but the adverse childhood experience studies is what that refers to, and we'll dive into all four of these areas. And as time allows, I would love for you to continue dialoguing about the current scientific findings, because it matters. Things have changed. We have learned so much more about the brain in the last 10 years than we ever knew. And so that matters. How many are familiar with the term epigenetics? And so that's an important understanding. And you may be, depending on where you got the information from, if it wasn't in the last 3 years, your understanding about epigenetics may need to change. Because we're an emerging science, we're learning. We're learning and growing. And that's one of the things that we're committed to, is how do we stay on top of that learning curve? Because it's important when it deals with people. So we're going to start with the neuroscience. And when we talk about neuroscience, my hope is that we, again, it's only going to be a very, very small time, because I can't get into the real specifics of neuroscience, but I want to give you enough understanding of that. But before we jump into it, I want you to make sure you are ready for this information. Because I'm going to give you a break. So we're gonna have a quick 10-minute break so when you come back and you revive and you're excited about learning about them, I know I may be one of the few science geeks that just love this kind of stuff, but I think it's gonna be relevant information about how to really connect deeply with students. So I'm looking at the clock here. It's 10 minutes to 10. I'm gonna start talking again at 10 o'clock. And the best things that I say are right after break. It's my story and I'm sticking to it, okay? So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, well, thank you, and welcome back for sure. It's always a risk when you let folks go on break, whether you'll have anybody when you return, so thank you for coming. I mean, I talk by myself, but it's so much better that to have you in the room. So I want to get into the neuroscience, and there's a piece of the neuroscience that is really important for us. And when we first started out, we started talking about the triune brain. And after more reflection, we realized, well, this was actually neuroscience from 1954. I think things have changed since then, and they have. And so we committed to moving into what we call the predicting brain. And prediction process, for those of you who are familiar with some of that research, but there's a video that I want you to see, just a quick, I think it's like a 7.5 minute video. But Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett is the scientist she's narrating the video. And some of her work is just fascinating when it comes to how the brain does what it does, and a better understanding of how it does that makes a lot more sense. And we'll break it down a little bit into how it relates with trauma and resilience, but I want to give you some of this background with this quick video, okay?
When you see this pounding and clapping, your brain is filling in the gaps. There's no sound here. And if you're a fan of the rock group Queen, your brain might even start predicting this filling in of gaps is prediction, and it's how your brain works all the time. Have a look at this. Right now, your brain is working like crazy, searching through a lifetime of experience, making thousands of guesses at once, weighing the probabilities to try and figure out what this is most like. Not what is this, but what is this most like from your past experience? If you still see black and white blobs, then you are in a state that scientists call experiential blindness. Want to be cured of your blindness? So now, many of you see food on a table. Cherries at the bottom, lemons and oranges at the top and to the right, lettuce on the left, and a little bit of ginger peeking out from the bottom left. Why do you see these black and white blobs differently than you did a moment ago? What you see is a combination of what is on the screen and what is in your head. Your brain is doing something really remarkable. It's changing the firing of its own neurons. So you experience cherries and lemons and lettuce when all that's there is a bunch of blobs. So believe it or not, this is not a trick. This is a special example that we built to reveal to you how your brain actually works under the hood. Every waking moment of your life, your brain is using past experiences to predict and create your current experiences. Prediction is why some people see a dress that's black and blue, while others see a dress that's gold and white. It all depends on whether your brain is predicting that you're seeing the dress in the morning or in the evening. Your predicting brain is why you daydream. It's how you imagine all the ways you might save the day. Or win an argument you've yet to have with someone. In every waking moment, your brain is doing its best to guess what will happen next. If your brain didn't predict, then sports couldn't exist. A soccer ball can be kicked faster than 100 kilometers per hour, but our eyes have a delay up to 190 milliseconds or even longer. In the space of that delay, the ball has moved 5.3 meters. Think of how much faster a baseball or a hockey puck goes. Many predictions are at a micro level. Your predicting brain is guessing how much water and salt and glucose your body needs to stay alive and healthy, predicting the meaning of bits of light. It's guessing whether the rustling in the grass is a wild animal or just the wind. Every time you hear speech, like right now, your brain breaks up the continuous stream of sounds into phonemes, syllables, words, and ideas, all by using prediction. Other predictions are at the macro level. You're interacting with a friend and Based on context, your brain predicts that the two of you will smile at each other. So, you smile first in anticipation of her smile. Your movement then causes her brain to issue new predictions and guide new actions, back and forth in a dance of prediction and movement. Predictions are automatic, effortless, and you have no sense that you're doing them. Yet they make sense of the world in a quick and efficient way. Without them, we'd be deaf and blind. For many years, scientists believed that your neurons spend most of their time asleep and wake up only when stimulated by something in the world. Now we know that all your neurons are firing constantly, nudging one another at various rates. This is called intrinsic brain activity, and it's one of the great discoveries of modern neuroscience. Even more compelling is that this intrinsic brain activity represents millions of predictions of what you will experience next based on all the experience of your past. These predictions all combine into a simulation of the outside world. Prediction turns shapes and sounds into trees and grass and runners. Your brain predicts a honk is from a car, or a honk is from a goose. There's no sound here. What you're experiencing is a consequence of your brain simulating the world. Scientists sometimes call this perceptual inference. Because these predictions are filling in gaps of information that are missing. In fact, seeing something can cause your brain to predict what it will taste like. What it will smell like. What it will feel like. Your brain is predicting all the time, effortlessly, automatically, because predictions are more efficient than reactions. Combining past experiences to create your simulations of the world. And these simulations are the basis for all your experiences and all your actions. This is your predicting brain in action.
Isn't that a great prediction? We'll break this down a little bit, but any questions about the video? Does it make sense? Should I look at it? Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. I could have caught it too. I just had a question about, it mentioned like blind and deaf, and it said like if we, I'm gonna get this right, but it sounded like it was saying like if you're blind or deaf, like you're lacking maybe like brain, like predicting brain. Is that right? Am I not interpreting that right? Because this video also is like implying that like if you are deaf, it sounds like it's saying like if you're deaf, then there's something that's not connecting, or is that, I'm not, am I getting that right? Or can you help me, can you explain a little bit more about people with disabilities, like how that would translate over to predictive brain?
Yeah, I know her research well, and so I'm trying to see, I don't know, I'd have to see what part of the video that you're referring to, but how the brain does what it does is, well, here's the best way to describe that, perhaps. We've heard this old analogy before. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it still make a sound? Okay. How many of you say yes, it still makes a sound? Okay. A neuroscientist would say no, it doesn't make a sound, because sound is not in the outside world. Sound is in the internal world. Outside world is just air pressure and vibration. And it needs something special to be able to detect that air pressure and vibration to turn it into a sound. And that special thing would be, well, the human ear. Any mammalian ear will do, but the process of how our peripherals do that, they collect the vibration, they collect the air pressure, they bring it into the peripheral and run it through. I'm oversimplifying, but it's almost like a chemical that runs across these thousands of little hair fibers and up to a cranial nerve, and that is still not a sound. The sound comes from when that gets converted based on our experiences. So how an infant would experience the air pressure and vibration of a dissenting tree would be quite different than an adult, because they don't know what one is. They don't have a frame of reference of what that would sound like. And so it's not that someone with disabilities is anything less. It's that we have, because of our experiences, we have created what we would call, it is natural, I guess is the word we use, is natural to us. But the process is the same for all of us. Sometimes that mechanism will produce, sometimes we don't have peripherals that can detect air pressure and vibration. Cochlear ear plants have helped us to reproduce that. They do what the brain isn't doing when it doesn't have a peripheral that can detect that. So I would say with the predicting brain, it's not about a disability. It's about how the brain takes the information to try to help us make sense of it. And we make sense of it in just different ways depending on how it comes into us. The parts of the brain, we used to refer to the brain stem and the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, that is formed simply because for humans, our detection, our peripherals are pretty much in the same place. So if you've got ears on both sides of your head, you're getting input in a certain place, and that's coming in a certain place, and that's going to wire in a certain area. If you got input coming in from your eyes, that's going to wire in a certain area. But when you don't have that input coming in, it produces a different set of wiring. So the brain helps us understand what happens when that input isn't coming in, what happens next. And so we have better understanding than if you don't have the ability to have input coming in, how will the brain connect and how will those neurons fire? So we have some more awareness of even how to restore that if an individual chooses to. Some people might not choose to, but if they choose to, we'll say, well, how can we, even with these devices, they collect light in a similar way at a lower resolution than our peripherals. These are amazing in terms of resolution, but this has resolution. So now they can even take the signal that this sees and send it to the brain and have some clarity, at least being able to see shapes enough to avoid those types of things. So our understanding of how to be assistive in our technology becomes better because of the predicting brain. But I don't think it necessarily judges one being primary to the other. It's just how will the brain work around? How will it do what it needs to do in order to keep the body running safe without the information coming from the external world? Does that make sense a little bit? And we'll break that down a little bit because I think that it seems like it shouldn't matter because we think, well, I know that it's still a sound. But once we start to understand where sound really does occur, then interventions become easier. Because if you're intervening, trying to figure out where the sound is, and you'll miss out the fact that you've got to pay attention to the air pressure and vibration first. Before you can do that. And so that's why the cochlear implant becomes so important, because it says, now I know how to detect air pressure and vibration. And now we got to figure out how to convert the signal so the brain can make use of it. And that's where it becomes extremely relevant, especially when when we have a better understanding of how somebody's doing that. We have a better understanding of how their responses to certain stimuli might be and what that might look like. So it really helps us to predict patterns of behavior better when we understand where the patterns are coming from. And so when we start with this, the very first thing that we have up here is sensory input. And that's what that sensory input starts the whole mechanisms. Something has to occur in the external worlds, some sensation. Like ears, it detects, but it's air pressure and vibration. Eyes, it's light. You know, if I said to you, what color is this chalk? We probably would have an answer for that. But color doesn't exist in the outside world either. Color is something that our brain also determines based on our experiences and our culture to some degree. It's just light frequency bouncing off an object at a certain frequency. That's all it really is. And our culture has called that frequency a certain shade. Not all cultures call those frequencies the same thing. If you ask some people in some countries, how many colors does a rainbow, does anybody know how many colors a rainbow has in it? I mean, we've learned a little acronym sometimes, Roy B. Gibbons, or however, Roy G. Gibbons, that's what it is, yeah. But there are other cultures that see it differently, that say 6 instead of 7. The truth from a scientific point of view, it's all of them. It's a spectrum. We just happen to, our brain is the one that classifies it and pulls it out and calls it a certain color, but it's the whole spectrum. And understanding that helps us a little better. Oh, got a hand in the back, yes. Thank you.
It's so good. Mr. Griffin, thank you very much for your work this morning and the last 25 years. If this question is not within the scope of the workshop, you can point us in the right direction. So in some ways, the video we have seen talks about what's going on in the brain of the individual, but it also speaks about what's going on between us. You can't see my smile, but I am smiling. Part of what we have learned in the last few years is students who come to us who are neurodivergent. And I can't see what's going on in the brain. But in a residential setting, and some of my learned colleagues, it's in the learning environment, keys, right, strategies, and so on. So is there at some point going to be some kind of discussion, some kind of guidance around how we might think about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And for me, I think the reality is that we're all neurodivergent to some degree. We have close to 96 billion neurons that are firing, and there is absolutely a very low probability that they're all firing in the same way for people. Unfortunately, our collective reality, once we have agreed, we start to have a standard. And then if you fall inside that standard, you're part of the in-group. When you don't fall inside of that standard, you're part of the out-group, and that creates a whole nother problem. And I know there's a couple of you that I'll be talking at the Sherwood Foundation next week on inclusion. And that really matters in terms of what we consider our in-group and out-group and how we treat people whose neurons fire in a similar pattern, not the same, but a similar pattern, and ones that fire in a different pattern. But what I can tell you is the thing that happens between us is because of the sensory input. Because what's happening to somebody else, we are picking up on what they're saying, because that's registering as air pressure and vibration, how they're saying it, the tilt of their head, all those things it's input that we're picking up, and we're trying to make sense of all that input. My oldest son was born on the spectrum, and so as a parent, my deep desire to understand a little bit more about that I think was transforming for me to be able to see how sensory input impacts someone's output. We have 11 million sensory receptors all through the body. That's a lot, 11 million. Do you know how many scientists say that we can pay attention to in any given moment? About 40 or 50 of them. So there's a lot of things that are happening, input that's coming in, that's being collected, that we're just not aware of, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. And so an individual like my son, who they would say would be neurodivergent, for him, and unfortunately the diagnosis for him at a young age was ADHD and ADD. It's because we think that he pays attention to more than 40 or 50 of them. And that's what's hard for him. And we were aware of this is when literally my wife, my partner was, we were trying to change a ceiling fan. And my son comes in, he says, aren't you supposed to turn the electricity off? And of course, I'm trying to, dad explain, I'm saying, well, this is ohm meter and that's what it's designed to do. And, I'm trying to explain that to him and I tap it and realizing that it was short circuiting. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You're right, it's not. And I'm like, how did you know that the electricity was still on? He said, I can hear it. I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, you can hear it. And he's tracing the pattern of electricity in the wall. And I'm thinking, oh, no wonder it's so hard for him sometimes because he's aware of things that happen that the average person may not hear or see. And it's hard to ignore it to some degree. So sometimes an individual has, when they can pay attention to more sensory input, it's hard to figure out which ones to do something with. And for a long time, what was said by professionals were, oh, he can't read social cues very well. And we understand now that it's just too much going on. And so any person that's, when they're talking, he's just aware of so many different things, it gets overwhelming. And it's just easier for his brain to say, yeah, that's just too much work. Just assume what they're saying and move on. Because it's just overwhelming for him to sit and listen to somebody with all the stuff going on. And the pandemic for him was helpful. I mean, he had done poorly in school. We were told that he'd be in special education forever, and he was dead set in proving that, no, he could do mainstream school. So he went to mainstream school, not doing very well in school at all. The pandemic comes along, and all of a sudden he starts getting A's and B's. Because he can control his sensory input. He didn't have to worry. He was in his room by himself and where he felt safe. And so that he was able to focus his energy without having to spend so much energy trying to be aware of all the different sensory input that's coming in. And so I think the way we can look at neurodivergent really is how someone is taking in input. If they have neurons, and they're human, it's a large number of them. The brain cells, those neurons are working in a similar format and in a similar way. However, if it's collecting more information or if it's collecting less information, it's gonna have an impact on how the system works. And if we understand that, we can put things in place to make sure that we can make the best of that. Because I think that there's a perfect job out there somewhere for my son. Because he is someone, I think like a detective or something, investigator. Because he can look at a picture and he'll see so much detail that's amazing. And I know there's a place for that if there's enough adults in our culture that will have enough patience to work through when things get overwhelming. And his processing, because when somebody asks him a question, he's still trying to they're standing this far away, what does that mean? Their head's he's trying to figure out all that. And so the question just takes a while for him to get to the question because he's still trying to figure out friend or foe, in terms of this person. But most adults don't give him that time to process all that. And he's smart enough to know that, well, they're not going to give me time. Why even bother? But I think we'll get to a point where we start to understand that people just have a different way of processing. 96 billion neurons is a lot. And there's a different path everybody takes to really resonate and do what they need to do in order to feel safe enough to respond in the way we need them to respond. So I appreciate the question about neurodivergency. I just don't want us to get lost in the idea that they are different in some way. The differences are very minimal. And if we understand what those are, I think our ability to connect and work together become so much more seamless in that sense. So keep that in mind, that interaction between us is simply because for that person, their brain is collecting sensory input. And that means we're giving sensory input. And that sensory input goes through a process of what we call statistical predictions. It starts going through it's almost like an algorithm in our brain to find out, all this information that I'm getting, the question that it asks is really important. Because it doesn't ask, what is this? It says, what is this most like from my previous experiences? Because without something to compare it to, it doesn't exist in a sense. They've got to say, well, what is this most like? So all of our whole world, that's why an infant would experience the falling of a tree very different. Because they don't have enough reference to say, what is this most like? So it might be frightening. I don't know what that's most like. And that could be distressing to some degree. So the difference between asking what is this versus what is this most like says that we're making this based on our past experiences. Not your past experiences, not the collective's past experiences, your individual past experience is what it's running through. If you've never had it rain before, you've never been in the rain, drops coming out of the sky on your face could be distressing to some people for some reason, because they don't have anything to compare it to. What is this most like? But the next time it rains, you say, oh, this is like it happened before. And so this is where the dividing point really gets, is when they're starting to compare it to their past experiences. Because then they're evaluating, the brain's evaluating to say, is this something that can help me to run the body properly, or is this something I have to avoid? Because that's the brain's number one role, is to run the body. It's survive and advance. I've got to help the mechanism that I'm operating to survive. And so I need to find out, what is this most like? So you think about it from an evolutionary point of view. People who lived many generations before us had a different sensory input. They didn't see the same things that we see. And their role, they wake up in the morning with a goal in mind of, I've got to make it to the next day. I've got to find enough food to make it to the next day. So when they saw something in the distance, the brain was pretty clear on what it was. Is that something that I could eat, or something that will eat me? Right? I mean, it's pretty basic. But which one do you think it was defaulted to? Which one do you think was the primary drive? Something that can eat me, or something I can eat? Eat me. Because eating was something that helps you to make it to the next day. If you get eaten, making it to the next day doesn't matter, right? So the brain has a default towards a threat response. And that's an incredibly important understanding. It's a default, it's an automatic wiring mechanism that says you better pay attention to what can harm you first, or that the idea of survive and advance won't matter. Yes, you need to eat, but you don't need to eat if you're not alive. So stay alive first, and then figure out what you need to do. So with that default and understanding of that, I think we'll have better clarity in what people do, because the brain now is wired to seek something that could harm them in order to stay away from it. It doesn't want to be surprised. It can't afford to say, well, I think it's something I can eat, and get too close and find out they were wrong. So it's going to lean towards that threat response. So when you're working with students and you're assuming that everything is okay, just know that their brain, those 96 billion neurons, are leaning towards the fact that there's a threat somewhere. They may not know where it is, but the brain is looking and scanning for it. And sometimes they might find it in you, sometimes they might find it in another classmate, sometimes they might find it in the temperature, but their brain is wired to try to find the threat to avoid. Not because they're different, it's only because they're human. That it's wired to do that. And it's very good at that. That's how we survive and advance. And so we're going to start with the threat response. You have that in red zone. And so when it's a threat response, when it sees some input and runs it through its brain, what is this most like? It's going to say, is it most like something that's a threat first? And we call that unbalanced interoception. Interoception is that our inside sensations So it's, and we say unbalanced because the body is designed, it's supposed to be homeostasis, what they call it. That's the balance point, when everything is optimal. When the heart rate is at its optimal rate and the oxygen to the body, all that's optimal, that's homeostasis. Allostasis is when it's out of balance. And the brain's job is to make sure that it doesn't stay out of balance, that it gets back into balance. Because when it's in balance, the body survives and advances better. And so when it's a threat response, it's tipped out of balance. And it's the brain will start sending other chemicals to the body to start to let us know that, hey, there's a possible threat. And you better find a way to address it. And so there's these chemicals that go to our body that help us to focus better, unfortunately, on a threat. And that's the cortisol and adrenaline, we know those often as the stress hormones. But they're chemicals in the body that are designed in order to have a certain amount of focus in order to survive a threat. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris has a great TED Talk, and she talks about if you're walking in the park and a bear jumps out, okay? What would you do if a bear jumps out? Yell it out, what would you do? Scream, die, what else? Run, look big, yeah, people say, what, you say what type? Yeah, see, now some people think that way. I had a person break it down to me. Well, if it's got black hair and it's shorter, I'll do this. If it's got red, and I'm like, I don't care. For me, I was like, I'm not going to stand around long enough to make you figure out how long the hair is. But that's real for some folks because in their statistical prediction, they need more information to say how much of a threat is this. And so we will all respond differently, and that's why we have when that those chemicals start to dump. We have some responses. And that's what they call the fight or flight, is what's basically known as. We put freeze in here because that's a phenomenon that we think is important. Now some add some really cute words like faint and fawn and fornicate, and you can add all kinds of F words in there. But the reality is the fight or flight are the basic approaches that the brain's going to say, do something to try to run away from the threat. You're trying to avoid the threat or conquer the threat, but you got to deal with the threat. And so it'll put forth a mechanism to do so. And everybody's response will be a little bit different. And our responses change depending on the sensory input. Think about if what are you supposed to do when you're confronted with a shark attack? Anybody know? Punch it in the nose, right? Who figured that out? Who was the first person that figured it out, right? It was somebody who maybe it was a surfer or something out in the middle of the water and you get attacked by a shark and the brain started looking around, sensory input says, wow, there's a lot of water around here. I can't outswim, I can't flee from this shark in this environment. So it says, that's not gonna help you survive. You better find something else out. So they fought back and punched in the nose, the shark swam away and it came back on social media and told everybody, and and so now we think that we're supposed to do. I don't know if that works or not. I hope I don't have to find out if that works or not. But it's based on the idea of your brain's gonna say, what do I need to do to survive? And it'll do something. It'll figure out something, and that's why everybody's responses can be different. Because you're picking up out of 11 million sensory receptors, you're paying attention to a certain amount that says do this. But that person who's paying attention to another set of sensory input might do something totally different. And if your experiences say that, hey, I've got some knowledge about certain bears and what they will do. If the experience say that, it's going to use that to determine what you should do. Versus if you don't have a lot of experience, like me, I don't have a lot of experiences with bears. And so I'm not going to try to figure out what color they are or anything else. I'm just gonna hope I'm with somebody else and I can outrun them. That's my hope. Because I'm trying to survive and advance. And so the downside of that is that whole process of getting us to move takes a lot of resources. Just to be able to increase the heart rate more, to send more blood, more oxygen to the body, so you can, if you had to confront an attack, maybe you could run longer in a sense. And even our blood constricts a little differently under fight in case we were mauled, in a sense we would bleed less. It's a beautifully designed system to be able to try to prevent or at least try to help you to survive an attack in a sense. But again, it's very, very energy dependent. It's a huge drain of the energy. And so we're not designed in a sense to have that much cortisol and adrenaline flowing through our body all the time. So which Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris says, but what happens when the bear comes home with you? So she's alluding to what happens when the stress is all around you. And so that cortisol and adrenaline is really helpful in a short burst because it helps you to run and get away from the bear perhaps. But when it's happening all the time, now it's got some really drastic impacts because our body wasn't designed that way, and it starts to borrow energy from other systems. Your brain says, well, wait a minute. Well, you don't have enough cortisol and adrenaline to run this system for very long. So let's borrow some energy from the digestive system because you don't need to eat in the middle of a fight. So let's borrow some of that energy. Okay? Oh, you don't need to reproduce. So let's borrow some energy from your reproductive system. You don't need to know when to go to sleep and when to wake up in the middle of a fight. So let's borrow some energy from your circadian rhythm systems. So it starts borrowing from all these other systems. And what happens to those systems if that keeps happening time after time? If they go offline, there's some problems with those. And then now we know that there's a lot of adult onset diseases that occur because of stress. Because the systems have been lending their energy to this threat response system and doesn't have enough energy to run them very well. And that's fairly well documented. Yes, Dr. Jones. Where's the box? There we go. Thank you. They appreciate you.
Thank you, Rick. I had a quick question. You were talking about the statistical prediction process. And you also were talking about the things that we learn directly, but also indirectly, right? So there's like the vicarious learning that's happening. But then I'm also wondering about the things that we learn that are false or lies, but those get integrated into the statistical prediction process.
Sure. Yeah, because the brain doesn't know. It's just taking in the data. And here's what's interesting with that process. That energy drinkers, and what Dr. Johnson's talking to you, you think about that there's this return error. Now we've got other sensory input that's happening during the event. Because again, 11 million sensory receptors, they're firing every second. So during an event, a lot of sensory input is being taken in. And some of that is going to be, could register in a different way. So what's going to happen? Let's go back to our bear analogy. You walk through the park, a bear jumps out, okay, and you get away. And what's going to happen is your brain is now going to remember that. So the next time you're walking down in the park, and you see a tree, that memory is going to start to, your brain's going to say, in order to keep you safe, the last time you saw a tree like this, there was a bear and you almost died, so you better be on the lookout. And so we start to become more aware of that. Now, is the threat behind the tree? We don't always know, but the brain doesn't care. And I think that's what Dr. Johnson is saying, is like the data about a bear being behind a tree may not be accurate, but the brain doesn't care. It says, I'm gonna hedge my bets because I have a default for threat and I've got to help you avoid it. So it's gonna pick up on sensory input to say, next time you're near a tree, a couple of drops of cortisol and adrenaline to say, be aware, be focused. But if it was really close, if the danger was really harmful, and the brain says, no, you can't even get that close anymore. Now it's gonna start firing the next time you're even in the park. You're gonna start having some cortisol and adrenaline flow through and you're gonna feel that little irritation. And then for some people, it's gonna go even farther back than that. The attack happened on a Wednesday. So when Wednesday comes, they wake up and they start feeling a little irritation because like, remember this day, you better stay focused because you almost didn't make it. And so we talk about it, well, did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? No, it's their sensory input that's going through the statistical prediction saying, remember Wednesdays, you never know, right? So on an extreme sense, this is what PTSD is that you're responding to sensory input that was most like a threat, even if the threat doesn't exist. Because the brain doesn't really care if the bear is there or not, because it's trying to help you avoid it long before it's even a problem. And I can guarantee you face people every day that think that there's a bear behind a tree, even when it's not. but their body will, and their behavior, that fight, flight, or freeze is still kicking off, even when there's no actual threat. Does that make sense? So we often say, you know, that it's inaccurate, but the brain says, I'm hedging my bets. If I want to survive, I better treat it like it could be serious. I don't know for sure, but I'm not going to take any chances. So we've learned a lot of things because we survived. We made it today. And our brain says, well, you did this by, thinking about bears possibly being behind trees. So if I want to make it this far longer, I better start thinking that there could be bears behind trees. And you think how that plays out with people. And again, I know that this is really what I'll talk about next week for sure, but to somebody, if you think about a baby that comes into the world, and kind of how genetics works is that baby probably shares some genes with their caregiver. I mean, yeah, there's times when it's different, but for the most part, that's kind of how genes get passed on. So it's looking into the eyes of somebody who probably looks just like them. So they've got sensory input of something that looks like them. And when you're cared for and nurtured by something that looks like you, that's what you're gonna think. And something that looks different than that, you may think registers as a threat because your brain's wired to perceive threats too. And you're gonna call and look at that baby, oh, you're just racist, baby, because baby's just responding to a threat, a perceived threat. We know that it's not always a real threat, but that baby's brain doesn't know. And you carry that out enough years, you've got some problems like we have in our culture. Of people who see threats in things that may or may not be threats. And then you have a culture that's telling you things like, well, stranger danger, you ever heard of that? Yeah. And so we think things that are strange, things that aren't like things that I know, are dangerous. And I despise that concept because I'm like, that's kind of harmful to think about things that are strange being dangerous. I mean, I get it. As a culture, we want to keep people collectively safe. But telling them that things that are strange are dangerous, I don't think is the way to do it. Because that means there's a lot of strange things and you're thinking that a lot of things are dangerous. And your brain is going to send messages to your body to try to keep you safe from things that you think are dangerous. I would much rather have the culture say things that are strange, go seek a trusted adult and ask them, what do you think that this is dangerous or not? I just want to assume it's dangerous because that leads to a lot of problems. I mean, and believe me, I understand vulnerable populations and all that. But you know what happens when you've got just a large population of people who think people are dangerous because they're different? That is destructive. But that's literally how our brains are wired. So we've got to do better in the statistical prediction category of training brains to think differently. I got to take my baby to church and pass them off to somebody who's a little different. So they learn to say, oh, that person who looks different can keep me safe too. Then it starts to be wired with something different. Because, as Dr. Johnson's saying, it's inaccurate to think that everything that's strange is dangerous. That is simply inaccurate. At best, it's incomplete, right? But we know, and sometimes it is just downright inaccurate. Not all things that are strange are dangerous. But we have to teach our statistical predictions that that's the case. Our culture has not done that very well. So we find ourselves in this mess. Now, so any questions about our threat response? Now, this is the phenomenon known as trauma. And unfortunately, we always think of trauma as being like the really big issues. Like maybe like we think that there's a trauma Olympics and that it's only the gold and the silver and bronze that get the medal. And so if you don't have these huge traumas, then you don't really have trauma. No, our brain doesn't do that. It doesn't say which ones are worse. It says, I'm going to try to keep you alive regardless of the threat, whatever the threat is. So when we have this message that it's only these people who have these adverse childhood experiences that have had trauma, that's incomplete. So according to how the brain really responds, how many people in the world have trauma? All of them. If you're human, if you've got neurons, because they're wired to have a threat response, and so you're having cortisol and adrenaline flow through your body all the time. Now, yes, there is a difference in terms of how much cortisol and adrenaline are released and for how long a period of time. Absolutely. The brain is smart enough to know that I don't have to give the whole dose of cortisol and adrenaline for small things, right? It's like that email at work, when you have that little chime, that it used to be, you've got mail, but now it could just be a little ding and sometimes it just pops up. Okay, so anytime you hear that ding on your phone or the vibration on your phone, and you know it's an email, is that threat producing for everybody? For some people it is, isn't it? For others, they can't wait to see what it is. Many of us are addicted to that. As soon as it goes off, we gotta be looking. Well, I shouldn't say that because we look before it goes off. I mean, we're constantly looking just to see. Well, it's almost like, well, why haven't I got a message yet today? So but imagine what that's like. Let's say you're new to your job and you just came from maybe living on the streets and you sort of say, I don't want to go back to that. That was awful. I'm going to keep this job. And then all of a sudden you're at your new job and they remind you, well, you're on probation. And then something happens. Well, you're on probation, but we're going to send you an email about how we decide about this event today. Do you think now that email starts to mean something different to you? Now all of a sudden that ding of that email is starting to bring a lot more cortisol and adrenaline. Because the brain says, no, it knows the difference between something life-threatening and not. It's like a lot of times this statistical prediction is benefited by repetition. The more times you experience something, the more your brain starts to say, well, it's important. Because I see that's how we learn language. When we hear a certain word over and over again associated with a certain object, oh, doggy. If you hear it enough times, you start, that's how you learn, right? But do you have to have that repeated exposure to like a red hot stove? No, when the body experiences something that could be life-threatening, it's no, you don't need repetition. You better not get repetition. Figure it out now that this is not okay. So life-threatening things jump up that threat level. And so do repeated things also tell us how important something is. So that's how that statistical prediction is getting wired. So let me ask you about this then. With that understanding, instead of you walking down the park when the bear jumps out, what if you've got your baby in a stroller? And now you're in the park and a bear jumps out. Do you think you have an increased sense of threat or a lessened sense of threat? Increased. Yeah. Why is that? And we feel that there's something vulnerable that we need to protect. But now let's turn our focus to the baby. Does that baby have the same threat level you have? They're looking sensory input. Let's go at the beginning. They have sensory input. They look and they see something, big animal, ears on top, long nose, hair all over. In their statistical prediction, what might that be? What's that most like? A teddy bear, a family pet, right? So are they going to have cortisol and adrenaline in their system? No. It's not a threat to them. It's going to release a whole nother setting. When will the baby start to panic? When it looks at the parent and its sensory input says, oh, I remember the last time my parent looked like that, there was problems. So it's the sensory input that goes into what is this most like? But so when that sensory input for the baby goes off, it could go off a different way. If the sensory input says this animal is something that I love, that I cuddle with, that keeps me safe and warm, that baby's gonna reach out to that bear. Oh, and a whole nother process is going on there. And so instead of allostatic load, it's homeostasis, it's in balance. And when it's in balance, our brain has thought of a great way to say, I need the body to be in balance, obviously, because that's when it's optimal. But yet I know that the threat response has to be the default. So I'm going to give you a reward for being in balance. And so that's why we refer to this process sometimes as our reward response. The reward mechanisms of our body start to come into play. So the chemicals that are getting dumped in are not cortisol and adrenaline. They're other chemicals. You've heard of these, right? Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, vasopressin. Those are what we call the feel-good chemicals. They're the ones that our brain is putting to us to help us to recognize that there's a reward and you need rewards. This is the one that says, hey, it's what you see in the distance is something you can eat. Let me give you enough energy, enough motivation to go get it because you need it. So that's a reward. It's a whole different process. And so the behavior associated is not fight or flight. Now you're engaging socially. Now, here's what's interesting. The social engagement, we think, well, why would our brain design us to be socially engaged with those chemicals? Because the whole design of this is to get your needs met. You need to figure out what's in the distance in order to get your needs met, because you need food. You can't stay in the same place forever. So our ancestors didn't stay in the same place forever. They went to go find food. And when they ate all the berries from that bush, they said, well, we're not going to survive if we don't go find another bush. So we had to be motivated to do something different. But that's what we did as adults. Do babies go look for other bushes? No, the human baby, the human infant is designed to need somebody else to take care of it. Babies are completely dependent on someone else. Now, not all creatures in the kingdom are completely dependent like humans though, right? We can't do anything on our own. And so there's chemicals that help us to connect with somebody who will meet our needs. Like oxytocin, it's in its highest dose in the human body with those born as females after the birth of their second child and beyond. It's nature's way of saying, just in case you wonder if you can love your second like you love your first, let me give you an extra dose of these chemicals to prove this. Because they're dependent on you, you've got to have a connection to them. And so it's passed on even through breast milk, so the baby can feel a connection because it needs to learn how to connect with you. Because if the baby isn't smiling and doing all those things that help you connect with it, it's not going to get its needs met. So it's got these chemicals to help it. Vasopressin is the highest dose and was born as male. You think of most of the research is done with voles, like prairie vole, and a prairie vole different than its other rodents, and maybe like a hedgehog or prairie dogs, all those kind of things. Similar animal in a sense, but a prairie vole will have a greater amount of vasopressin in its system than its relatives. And the prairie vole, out of its relatives, are the only one that is monogamous. So vasopressin has been connected with monogamy. It helps you to socially connect and stay connected with something. So the higher vasopressin that's in the system, the more likely you are to be monogamous. And I'm thinking they got to sell that in a spray bottle right there. It's like, but these are all chemicals that help you to stay socially engaged so that you can get your needs met. Because you can't do it on your own as an infant. Are you with me on that? Does that make sense for you? So the systems, so you got one that's helping you, that's the default, that's fight or flight. But another system is saying, well, you got to learn to engage or you're not going to make it too. So it's these counteracting systems. And the benefit to that is it's energy replenishing. It doesn't deplete the energy like the other system does. When these chemicals are going through your body, it literally gives the other systems opportunity to rest and get better. I mean, that's why they call it the rest and digest system. Because it's letting the other, like the digestive system, do what it does better. And so you stay healthier. The medical community will tell you when you are having these chemicals in your body is recuperating, recovering, and getting so much better and healthier. But the one thing we don't talk about is the thing that I want to especially hit on tomorrow a lot of is that this return arrow. Remember, we talked about the return arrow on the other side. On the far spectrum, it's PTSD, that you can be triggered by sensory input because all the sensory input during a threat is going to be associated with threat. And to keep you safe, you're going to be triggered. The rustling of the leaves next time in the park is going to remind you, oh, this could be a possible bear. But we don't talk about the triggering of the other things. We always think triggering is a negative thing, don't we? But triggering is just the initiation of a process. We don't talk about the triggering of the good side, and we should, because you can trigger people into being in a much better and healthier space. Because this, the red I said was the phenomenon we know as trauma. This is the phenomenon we know as resilience. It mitigates the trauma that we've experienced by having our body experience something different. And you can be triggered into those spaces. You can have sensory input that triggers you into a better space. Things that, it happens to me when I get to travel a lot, and so I'm downtown in the city and I smell barbecue, it just draws me to it. And I don't mean to offend anybody, I suppose if you're not into meat, maybe you feel that way when you mow the grass or something, but I'm just saying. There's this idea that when I have that smell, it just takes me back to my grandmother and the way she cooks, and it just brings back these great feelings. So I get triggered into a really, really wonderful feeling. through a sensory input. And it just happened the other day, well, we were all in the car together, my two sons and my partner, and my son had this taffy. And it was grape taffy, you know, it's got that high artificial grape smell. And instantly it took me back about, 50 years back when they used to have, you guys remember bubble yum, grape bubble yum? I mean, most of you are probably way too young to remember bubble yum. But it made me think of it because the first girl that I kissed was chewing grape bubble yum. And so unfortunately I said that out loud, but it's just that trigger that just took me back. Just from a sensory input. And all those feelings that I had in that moment come running back. And I'm thinking, we have some agency in being able to do that for people. We don't have to just rely on them being triggered into a negative space. We have some ability to say, well, if I know the sensory input that triggers you in a different direction, I can provide that sensory input and do something different for you. Because we know when you've got a student that walks into that classroom, if they have some sensory input, not like for me, the sensory input was just the school in and of itself. Going into any school triggered back all those negative feelings. So I felt bad for teachers that I had to deal with because I was already thinking about fight or flight just by entering the building. But if I had a teacher who was aware of how things that could positively trigger me, then I'd have a fighting chance in a sense. Because again, it's what they would call a dose response, not in the statistical dose response, even though that has some similarities. It's like the dose of cortisol and adrenaline. Let's look at yourself if there's this big test tube, right? And it's half full with a dark chemical. Let's say I've got coffee, black coffee, halfway full, and that represents cortisol and adrenaline. Okay. If I were to take the feel-good chemicals in the body, represented by a clear chemical, if I were to put just as much of that into that same test tube, would the test tube be clear or dark? It would be a mix, wouldn't it? It wouldn't clear it all out. The same amount wouldn't do enough. I would still have some residue of cortisol and adrenaline. But what if I had double the amount of the clear chemical and dumped it in? Would that start having a little bit different effect? How about 3 times? To the point of overflowing. If it overflowed and then that dark chemical just got rinsed out, eventually I would have nothing but clear chemical, right? So that's the solution. How do we put enough of the positive triggering stimuli in someone's world in order to rinse out some of that, the cortisol and adrenaline? That's going to come because they're human. And you absolutely have agency with being able to do that. But it requires what we call insight. Have enough insight to know what would do that for them. Because the same thing that does that for one person may not do that for somebody else. It may do just the opposite. You have to know what works for them. I know that's complicated. You're thinking, well, Rick, you don't understand. You know how many different students I see on the course of the day. Yes, I do. I was in a similar role. I know exactly what that's like. But I also understand the devastation one student with enough cortisol and adrenaline could do to a whole campus, to a whole community. So we're trying to figure out, well, I got to make sure that doesn't happen. Because people that cause that kind of destruction don't do so because they're full with a lot of these feel-good chemicals. They do so because they've got too much of the other chemicals going through the body, and the brain has said, you got to do something else. What you've been doing to keep you safe isn't working. Take it up a notch. So if somebody somewhere isn't rinsing that out and doesn't have that balancing effect, that's what we call mitigate some of that trauma, pretty soon something's going to happen. And you know when those things happen, everybody says, well, God, I never thought it would do this. Well, you should, because it will. Because that's what the brain does in order to try to keep itself safe. I wish I could tell you the brain is so sensitive to everybody else that it doesn't care about itself. We have to train it to do that. It's naturally wired to say, survive in advance. By any means necessary. Anything at your disposal, survive in advance. I have to train it to say, oh, be sensitive to somebody else's desire to survive in advance too. So we have the phenomenon known as trauma. We have the phenomenon known as resilience. I want to overlay these with something, those concepts. So you start looking at that, your current experience is just sensory input. Stuff is going on around you. You may not be paying attention to it in a sense, because 11 million things happen every second. It might, but if you're focused on it and you are paying attention to it, it's going to go through another process. So your current experience has everything to do with how you're feeling currently, because it's going to base it through your past experiences, and it's going to make it interpretation is, will this help me avoid a threat, or will this help me seek a reward? It's going to make a pretty clear decision. And that decision is going to start that chemical release. And which chemicals are released matter. Absolutely matter. And yes, do we have the box? We can get up to the top.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. I always just try to ask one question, so you can forgive me. It's not a silly question.
No worries. I'll give you 4.
Well, I'll reserve the 2 for tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Sounds good.
Would you like to comment on this phenomena that is called generational trauma?
Yes, but thank you for that question. So there's a couple things that I want to make sure that they're put into. There's a difference between the discipline of neuroscience and psychology. Okay? Psychology is observing the effect of the mechanisms of neuroscience in people. And so there is a little difference in that. So things like generational trauma are going to come up a lot more in our next segment, because we're going to talk about epigenetics, because there are some things that get passed on in our genes. But also you think about what gets experienced, what somebody lives through. So if we know that it can be passed on through our genes, what our parents experience and how they interpret it are going to be a part of us too, even though we were never exposed to it. So that is what leads to generational trauma, is that through our genes, something gets passed on based on the statistical predictions that our bearers of our genes have experienced. And that can continue to go, that just like the curvature of your nose or something gets passed on from generation to generation, so might the effects of what they've experienced. And it can even skip generations. I mean, because of epigenetics, certain things get shut off and certain things get turned on. We don't always know exactly how somebody's going to respond to it in the same way. But yes, it can be passed on, which is different. You've heard the term perhaps vicarious trauma. Again, that's a psychological phenomenon that I think it's incomplete in the neuroscience world. Because the brain doesn't care the source of the trauma. It doesn't care the source of the threat. The brain doesn't think that the threat is secondary. That secondary trauma or vicarious trauma is the trauma that you experience when you're working with other people who are traumatized. The brain says it's a threat. The rest of the world says it's secondary. And I think that has some disadvantages. That people thinking that their trauma, that their cortisol and adrenaline flowing through their body is not primary, isn't significant enough. No, it's the bottom of their hole. You know what I'm saying? It's like the idea. Have you heard the term puppy love? To puppies, that's real love, isn't it? Everybody else judges that it's something different. The brain doesn't judge in that sense. It's a threat, doesn't matter where it came from, that's going to send the cortisol and adrenaline. So I say that to make sure that we're differentiating the outputs that are observed in psychology may be different than the outputs that are created, I think, and initiated, I should say, is probably a better word, in neuroscience. That doesn't mean that they're inaccurate, but I think it's just more complete when you start looking at it from the aspect of what's happening in the body. And so I don't use the words vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. Like, no, it's a threat response and the brain doesn't care where it came from or how you got it. It's cortisol and adrenaline coming through your body at different levels, of course. But even something that came in through another source, if it happens enough, your brain's going to say that's a big threat, I got to deal with it. So thank you for the question about that, and I hope that's helpful to understand that generationally, the genes passed on are absolutely part of it, but so is the experience that somebody else had. That is passed on just as similarly, because it's actually passed on in the genes. And again, we'll talk about that when we get to epigenetics. Yes, do we have a cube? I can pass it over.
Oh, so, for Christmas this year, somebody in my family gifted me the like pop sciencey book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, right? I don't know if people have seen it, haven't read it, I've heard some things about it. I think it goes to show what they thought I needed to learn from that book. But I was curious because I think I see that stuff all the time, like kind of like pop sciencey things. But even if people don't read it, they're taking that message, like that's how we get out of these, like that's how we go from red to green.
Yeah, and I think anything can move us into that. Again, it's a sensory input. If it's a sensory input based on what people are saying, what we read, what we see on TV, what we hear, however the message came in, it's a part of that 11 million sensory reception every second that our brain is deciphering what to do with it. Is this a threat or is this not? If we think that it's going to keep us safe, then we start using that information to keep us safe. But again, it's the significance of collective reality. Most of what we deal with isn't what we would call real in a sense, like our names. Yes, our name is real. We didn't, but it was made up. Other people had to agree to call us that. Somebody just came up, our address, right? Our address was just made up. And we had to agree that that's how we're going to find out how we get to people's houses. So a lot of things so it's tangible, it's real, it has some real effects. And so psychology and those things, some of that still has real effects. But it may not be real in the same sense. So the hard science may say, no, that is a perception that's based on this information. And that is very, very different. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have real effects and real consequences. It absolutely does. If you don't call me Rick, I may not turn around and listen to you. That has some consequences in terms of our relationship. But I also recognize that Rick was something that was just made up and we just agreed to call me that. We can agree to call me something different. Jokingly, I've done this for a couple of years, like when, like at a Starbucks or something, they say, what's your name to write in the cup? I will say master, because I love people calling me master. I'm like, this is my comeback, It's like, but it's like, if we agree to that, and so everything that happens, and this is the value of this information, everything that happens has consequences because somebody is interpreting it one way or another. And if we just recognize, that gives us a lot of just the control that we have as educators, knowing that how we can change somebody's life by what we help them to experience every single day matters. The smile that they get from us matters. How we tilt our head, everything, they're learning something from it. We just got to make sure they're learning the right thing. Things that are keeping them in the green and keeping them away from the red is the process in that. Are you guys with me on that? Does that make sense for you? And we're talking about it's sensory input. So we often think it's the words that we say. It can be because the words are a part of that statistical prediction. But the sound of it, the cadence, the tone, the volume also is communicating something based on their experience that we may not be aware of. And we've learned to judge that. And we've got systems that read that same pop psychology that say, well, if somebody acts like this, that means they're telling a lie. You ever watch some of those, and even the true crime stuff? My wife works for the public defender's office and only in capital cases. So she loves all that true crime stuff. And but it's so sad when you see somebody that's interviewing somebody in a witness room. And they say, oh, by the way they were moving around, I could tell they were lying. And then the other day we saw one, oh, they didn't move a bit, so I could tell they were lying. Well, which one is it? And the reality is, we don't know because the brain will do something completely different for somebody else. And so we've got all these things that say, well, if they move their eyes up to the left, they're telling the truth, but they moved up to the... Yes, there are some patterns, but that's for people who've had the same sensory input and the same experience in order for those patterns to be accurate. And the patterns probably were not generated from people who are consistently going to be a witness in terms of crimes. I don't think that they represent always the demographic of some of that material. So if we know the science, it says, no, it's sensory input. And we don't know what that sensory input is telling that individual and which chemicals are flowing in that sense. And when that might change. You know, in terms of interpersonal violence, you see situations, well, why I can't believe they'd stay? Why would they stay? Because their brain said, here's what will help you survive in advance. Do it this way. And when the brain says that no longer is working for you, the brain might tell it to do something different, and you never know what day that's going to be on. And so judging that to say people should always do this or people will do that, good luck with that. That is absolutely incomplete. And it's often just inaccurate. Because the effect on the body is what's going on. We know that people are doing something different because they feel that there are different chemicals in the body that are causing behaviors are at the bottom. Maybe behaviors are come at the bottom. Yes, there we go. Behaviors have come at the bottom. But think about that. The behaviors are at the bottom of this whole process, but we have whole industries focused on people's behavior. You're too late in the game at that point. By the time they're behaving in a certain way, they've already, the chemicals have already aligned to say, here's what's happening. They're seeking safety. The idea would be, don't wait to read their behavior to see what they're seeking. You're too late. Have enough insight to know what sensory input, because that's what starts it. Go upstream a little bit. Find that first domino to fall. That's where you have the most agency. If I can figure out what sensory input drives you in one direction, then I know how to even change your behavior. Remember the public policy of 3 strikes and you're out? How well did that work for us? And we had this great idea that, well, hey, people are committing felonies like crazy. What we can do is if they commit 3 felonies, we'll lock them away for life. Then nobody's gonna ever want to commit that 3rd felony. And they were having congressional meetings, but what should we do with all those empty prisons once we enact this 3 strikes and you're out? Maybe we should turn them into youth centers, and they had all these great plans. Is that what happens? We have now a whole lot more youth centers? No, what happened with 3 strikes and you're out public policy? What happened to the prison population?
Money was made.
Yes, and then it just mushroomed. And we're the most incarcerated country on the planet. Because we jumped in and tried to we thought we could motivate their behavior. But it didn't change some of the sensory input that people in certain communities were still experiencing. That still registers as a threat response. And so you can see the impact of not understanding the science. And literally, we've got whole industries based on behavior. I just think it's a little late. We have to move things ahead. So, and I'm not saying behavior is not important. It's still on the graph. It's still very important because you know if it's happening, the biggest takeaway is that it's draining other resources. And it's going to be even harder to get somebody to see something different once the behavior is started. But if we can go upstream a little bit, we'll have much greater impact on even people's behavior. How's that sound to you? Does that seem like it's coming out of left field? Are you still with me? Okay. Is the trust okay? Yeah. Oh my God, because it's hard. Because we're so programmed to think about behavior. Because what happened, behavior initiates our sensory input and runs through our statistical predictions. Oh, I'm sorry, do you have a comment? Yes.
Oh, yeah, just real quick. I feel like you gave us a superpower with telling us that we could trigger the balance interoception, but I feel unclear on how to use or access that superpower.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking is, from the educator standpoint, and this might be getting ahead and like into what we're going to do tomorrow, but how to how to get to that last S, to take our insight and knowledge here and apply it to triggering that positive response. How important is it that we understand let's say like the model of the bear attack? How is it how important is it that we understand that there was a bear involved? And how we then trigger that balance into reception? Is it important that we know that or not?
That's a great question. That's the huge national debate. You hear a lot of programs say, well, don't talk about trauma. Let's talk about healing. Let's do healing centers of engagement. Let's do about recovery. Let's talk about resilience and everything. What I would say is it's a dual system of threat and reward. And you can't talk about one or the other. And so the term trauma informed, I'm still very much in support of. Because if you are informed, if you are aware about somebody's threat response, you can help them to avoid it better. Because the brain is defaulting towards that. So if you ignore that side of it, what the brain's doing as a default, you're missing out on a whole lot of stuff. So I would say it's extremely important to try to be aware of where somebody's interpreting the threat, so you could help them avoid it. Because what the desire would be is social engagement. Because if they feel social engagement where they know somebody else is going to help them meet their needs, then they don't have to spend all that energy trying to meet their needs themselves. And then that way they have enough resources left over to engage in learning. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about tomorrow is how do we, knowing that there's a resource allocation problem, we've got to be aware of what drains the resources so we can stop that and we can start increasing the other side of it. But if you only increase one side, if you only just increase and you're not aware of the other side, like remember I had the test tube and you overflowed it with the clear chemicals, but if you've got another system that's pumping in that dark chemical and you're not aware of that, you're going to get pretty overwhelmed trying to fill it up. And there's a lot of times when we do that we ignore or we haven't figured out what's causing the threat response. And so we spend a lot of time trying to bolster the green side of it. And then we get overwhelmed because like, this isn't working. I'm working like crazy because we haven't detected what the threat response is. We've got to shut off that threat response in order for this to be effective. So both sides of the system have to be critical to this. I don't know if any of you are economics folks, but it's like you don't just talk about supply. You don't just talk about demand. It's supply and demand. It's the interaction of both of them that make it work. It's the interaction of both because they're your default on the threat response. So that's got to have a significance. You've got to slow down or stop or mitigate that process in order to have any effect. Does that make sense? So it's very important that you try to find out this. If nothing else, at least be aware enough to say, it's a threat response. I don't know where it's coming from. Don't know where it's coming, but I know it's a threat response. And so I better do something. Or they're going to be spending all their resources trying to keep themselves safe. And it might be me. And so I better figure that out too. If I'm the trigger, then maybe I can do something different. That's why I wear the same colors. I don't want to be a trigger. At least I can control something. I'm going to control the things I can. Did I see a hand go up here in my purple? Yes.
Thanks. You may have started to get to my question right at the very end of what you just said, but sort of following up on Kyle's question, it feels like to be trauma informed would almost be a recipe for sort of an individual therapeutic relationship, like to get at that. Whereas your decision to wear those same colors would be more of a systemic or structural choice that you've made. It's almost like the difference between trauma informed versus trauma assumed. We assume that there's a negative bias there and an unbalanced interception.
Yeah.
And again, you predicted at the very beginning that we might be impatient, but I'm wondering if how we apply this in a classroom context or in working with the student population rather than with individual students.
Yeah.
How do you realistically be informed about individual trauma?
But those are great questions. And here's the reality of this. How many of you are in your position because you went to class for 3 hours one day? So you no other education, 3 hours of understanding.
Just continue.
Yeah, well, yeah. Right, over and over again for many years and probably many dollars. That's the reality of this work, is that I wish that I can give you a magic cure that just gives you all the things you're searching for, because I'm in the same boat of like, gosh, this is too important, I wanna know now. But the reality is, it's a process. And especially when you're dealing about a human that's got 96 billion neurons firing, and you're trying to figure out some pattern to that to be helpful, it's hard. But I'm gonna steal something from my later presentation we'll talk about. The number one protective factor is we got risk factors in terms of, we know that people have experiences that they're receiving a threat. But the number one protective factor of all time, you know what the number one protective factor is? A relationship. There is no body of science that has ever said anything different. For as long as it's been studied, a relationship has been the number one protective factor against almost every social ill on the planet. And that's the difficulty of how hard it is to be in a relationship. How long does it take to build a loving and trusting relationship? Anybody want to venture a guess? How long does it take to build a loving and trusting relationship?
3 hours.
3 hours, there you go. So after these 3 hours, I expect you to be in a great relationship with me, and people in my relationship that I'm in a relationship with give me money when I need it. The better way to ask that question is to ask the opposite of that. How long does it take to ruin a relationship? Exactly. So that means we're only seconds away at any given time, right? So a relationship is ongoing. Insight on somebody is ongoing. So even if I'm gonna give you a framework and I'm gonna help you operationalize it to some degree, but just know, the reality is it's ongoing. I saw them tear a building down. A gang of men in a busy town. With a mighty heave and a lusty yell, they swung a beam and a side wall fell. And I asked the foreman, are these men as skilled as the ones you'd hire if you had to build? And he laughed and said, no, indeed. A common worker is all I need. And I can wreck in a day or two what took the builder years to do. So I thought about this as I went on my way. Which of these two roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who works with care, measuring life, in a square? Or am I a wrecker who walks the town, content with the labor carrying down? I think we're one or two things. We're either building people up or we're tearing them down. So as much as we would like the answers of exactly what to do, I can tell you that your actions are either helping them to stay safe or registering a threat. And so the real answer to all the strategy questions are anything that helps them to see it as a reward or resource is a great strategy. And anything that can help them to avoid a threat response is a great strategy. Anything. Now, we can talk about how to make that more operational. There's lots of ways to do that, but the principle is clear. Stop the red, increase the green. Now, in the interest of time, I know I've only got a little time and I didn't even let you guys go on a second break, but let me give you this framework as we wrap this up in the next 30 minutes is that the concepts of this is as clear as threat response, because anything that causes a threat is a threat to them. Doesn't matter how we feel about it. Doesn't matter what we think it is, that they shouldn't be threatened by that. None of that matters. Because the chemicals in their body will determine how they respond to it. And that's based on the brain's desire to survive and advance. So hopefully it alleviates some guilt, but what you do is really anything that can stop them in feeling that there's a threat and increase their sense of safety. Because they're looking for it, they're hoping for it, and you become the relationship. That's the sad part about it. In our culture, there is no institution that's primary purpose is to help people develop a relationship, and that's sad. Because again, the number one protective factor of all time is relationship. But there is no institution with the primary purpose of building relationships. So where do we learn how to be in relationships that mitigate all this trauma? Where do we learn it from? Any thoughts about that? Do we learn, is it a great place to learn on the internet? Should we go to the internet to look for that? Family, okay, how's that working for everybody? It's hard, isn't it? You know, because our family didn't learn it from anybody either sometimes, so the answer, although it's relationship, and I know that it sounds hyperbolic, but a relationship comes in when somebody has taken the time to have some insight into me. To know what keeps me away from threats and increases my rewards. And a genuine relationship can do that. And your primary purpose is not to build relationships either. You don't get a paycheck to build a relationship. That's not what comes up on your evaluation, is it? But unfortunately, that is the number one protective factor. That is what's going to allow the greatest academic success, because it'll give them the most time and energy to be able to focus on learning. There's a lot of things that, you know, we hear that analogy here, what is it? Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, and teach him to fish, feed him for a lifetime, right? We know that that's incomplete, don't we? Because a lot of times it comes down to, well, who owns the pond? Because you can be the best fisher on the planet. Your name, sir? Ethan. Ethan, can we get Ethan in the box here for a quick second? Is it okay? Are you okay with the box? Okay, Ethan, do you fish?
Yes, I do.
Okay, are you pretty good at fishing?
No.
Okay, so, Ethan, let's say that, you were the absolute greatest, fisher on the planet. You fish better than anybody else. But yet you never got access to a body of water. What would happen?
Catch nothing.
Yeah, so he'd die of hunger like everybody else, in a sense. But let me ask you this, what happens if, you couldn't fish, you were horrible, never fished a day in your life, but I gave you access to a pond of fish and you were hungry? What do you think you would do?
I'd learn.
Exactly. The human spirit is people figure things out. You create enough opportunity for them to feel safe enough where they don't have to spend all their energy trying to keep themselves safe. They'll figure a whole lot of stuff out. I mean, that big textbook and all that stuff you're trying to pour down there, they can figure a lot of that out if they just felt safe enough. The brain is amazing. It can take in information, it can process things. It's got this it can do some amazing things when it can generate enough resources towards that. That's really what our role could be, is how do I make sure that they get enough neural resources dedicated to that process? I need to provide some opportunity for that, for the brain to do what it can do. If I just go in and start doing my thing and saying it'll help some people, because some people are in a space where they can make it work, and they do. They've got enough resources to figure things out with sometimes even despite of you. They'll figure some stuff out. But other folks might need to feel safer in order to release some of those neural resources. So tomorrow, what I would like to do is, there's a small piece I want to finish up today, but if you come back tomorrow, just by show of hands, how many of you might be interested in coming back tomorrow? How many? Well, I have some, well, good, I have some of the same. So what I'd like to do is I want to dive at your name? Kyle. Kyle, so Kyle had raised a good point, and so there's a couple things that I could do. My plan was to go more strategic into understanding strategy and structures, but I can be more practical as well, if that's helpful. Just as long as you understand the principle that it is anything that you can do to stop a threat response and to create a sense of safety is helpful. I can give you, we can start talking about some more tangible things of what that might look like. Typically, we've got a series of courses that we do that. We've got a course 1, a course 2, a course 3, we've got a workshop, we've got a variety of things. So literally it's, could be close to 50 hours of training that we would go through for folks. If you're feeling safe enough, if you're feeling like you can, hey, if I understand how to avoid threat, and if you give me some ideas on how people have created a sense of safety, I could probably make some of this stuff work. I think most of you are probably in that space. If you can, if you're interested, I can kind of jump the line a little bit and get into some of that tomorrow. You might have to figure out, I might have to navigate the PowerPoint a little different to get to that point, but I would love to be able to say, let's jump into some strategies, but what I would need from you is to be able to talk about a couple of things, okay? So as we wrap up today, I want you to think about those things you have to infer how it will work for you and the folks that you know, that there is no strategy that will work for everybody. None. Ever. There can't be. Because the same sensory input that works for somebody won't work for somebody else. So what I would like to invest in time doing is how to be aware of when somebody is going this way versus this way. I think that can be a helpful strategy. It's just some ability to know, can I observe enough? The language we call is observe. How can I observe when somebody is experiencing a threat response? So I know that at least I can do something different. I won't know what, but it's like anything else, it's trial and error, because it's 11 million sensory receptors. You have no idea which 50 they're paying attention to. So it's a lot of darts that you're throwing at a pretty small dartboard in the dark. So, but I think that it can be helpful, because it's like your desire to keep people safe can in fact keep them safe. And so a lot of that will be, how do I make sure people see my desire is to keep them safe? Because they're looking, they're trying to figure out friend or foe. And if they find somebody that says, hey, I'm trying to be a friend, okay, I know you're screwing up a lot, but at least your intent is good. And I think that's what happens in a genuine relationship, is then you get the benefit of the doubt a lot more in a relationship. Because somebody says, well, I know that's not what you mean. I know you're trying. But without that, there's almost nothing you can do to be helpful, because everything could be seen in a different light. And so I want to jump into real quickly a couple things. So I want to complete the neuroscience. I won't click this slide so in the interest of time. Talk about epigenetics in the sense of the best thing that you can know about epigenetics is that it's a process in which our genes learn to express themselves based on their environment. In their original concept, we've had a couple worldwide genome projects, and the first one when DNA was introduced in that sense, and folks were looking at that, they had this what they called, when they looked at the DNA cell, they call it junk DNA. Does anybody remember when the term junk DNA came out? Because there's this material around the cell that they didn't know what it did. Now we know what it does. It's receptive to the environment, and it changes the message inside the cell depending on what it experiences in the environment. So in a sense, somebody could have the identical DNA, but it'll express itself in different ways depending on what they've experienced. Two twins, separated at birth. One lives a charmed life, marries her high school sweetheart, things go great for them. The other one, lots of trouble, a death of a loved one, all kinds of challenges. 30 years down the road, put them together, they will look different. Have you noticed that in twins? If you know them when they're young, they look a whole lot more alike, but they look a lot more different when they get older because they've experienced different things. So it literally can change how our DNA is expressed. And to me, that is the science of hope. Because now we know that we can, by what we do, what we help somebody to experience, changes them at their cellular level. DNA, we used to think DNA was their destiny. Oh, man, they came in that family, they'll never have a chance. But now we know what they experience, how I treat them, how other faculty treats them, by what they see on the walls, what they see in the buildings, do they see a clean, all of that is changing them to their cellular level. It all matters, every bit of it. Because it only takes, remember how close we were with difficult at any given time of ruining a relationship. One bad incident could change a student's whole outlook here. One teacher saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. A student say, I'm done. And you won't even know what that one thing is. You won't even know if you said it or not in some situations. We had a situation out of Jubilee. my partner worked out there as well, and she's part of the intake committee. We had a young man come in, and her and the counselor were doing the intake. And this student wouldn't talk to them, wouldn't even look up, just wouldn't say a word. And so they called me on intercom, said, Rick, can you help us out? I came down there and wouldn't say a word. And so we were asking, so, why won't you speak? And then he would start talking to me and the counselor, who were both presented as male. And the counselor had said, you won't even look at Leanne. And he said, at least say something to her. It's just disrespectful. And so he finally looked up and said, Bill. Goes head back down and said nothing else. As a husband, I thought it was kind of funny at the time. I kind of giggled a little bit, but I thought, wow. And then that he doesn't want to even acknowledge her. So he was there about 13 months or so. And so I get another call on our phones to tell you which extension that I was calling, and my wife's extension came up and say, hey, how you doing? And she goes, the gentleman is from this area, I won't say his name, but he's in my office. And I just panicked, like, oh my goodness. So I dropped the phone, I just ran to her office, and I thought there was gonna be a conflict, and he's literally sitting down on the couch having a conversation. And I said, you never talked to Leanne, what's going on? And he said, oh, she cut her hair, and she had. So she used to have long hair, and now she doesn't remind me of my mother. Because we know in his history, his mother had abused him significantly. And just her hair, she had long black hair, she cut it short, made all the difference in the world. Changed his attitude completely towards her, from just a haircut. So that helped me understand sensory input. And you never know. We had no idea what was going on. And how quickly it could change. And again, I'm not taking any chances. I'm gonna try to do everything I can, just 'cause you never know. You never know.
Do you think he knew what was going on?
No, I think he was totally oblivious until it happened. He was saying, he never even thought about it. Then when she cut her hair and came in and he saw something different or registered something different, he's like, ah. It's almost like, that's not my mom. And things were fine. And that's really how quickly things can happen sometimes when there's a change of concept here. So a lot of times we think about all this therapy that has to happen. Sometimes it could be a different sensory input that makes all the difference in the world. Question?
It's not a question, it's a comment, but I wanted to make one connection to last year's community learning days that we had in this room with Dr. Rima Reynolds. And she was talking to us at one point about you're not going to be it for everybody. So we were thinking about how do you advise students well, how do you connect with them? And sometimes thinking about like, you can ruin a relationship so fast, like that is so stressful and kind of depressing as a professor, right? But if I remember that we work in community together and there are going to be some things that are just kind of beyond my control, like hair, that might make it so that I am not it for that person in terms of being able to move them forward with their education.
Absolutely.
But then being humble enough to help them find the people that are it for them or don't trigger them in that way. And then, we can best recover from that in relationship to each other too.
Absolutely. And so I get it finally, he's talking, I haven't used talking in 30 years. So one of the things we teach in one of our advanced courses, we call the quadrant intervention, okay? Now on this side of if it is the strength of the relationship. On this side, it's the importance of the task, okay? And here's how we learn to look at it that really identifies with Mary's point. So there are different interventions that you can use depending on how much relationship you have with somebody and how important it is what you're asking them to do. It's like the importance of this, like if you look in this category, it's like you don't have very much relationship. And the importance of the task, it really isn't that important. So what we say here is what we call pick another battle. Sometimes, you don't have the relationship to change it anyway, and it's not that important. For us on our campus, one of the issues was hats, okay? We thought, well, we're gonna bring these kids here and we're gonna make them wear uniforms and it's gonna have all this structure. And the kids who started coming year after year, like hats were their thing. And it's like, and my mom was there on campus with us, and she was from a generation that, especially men, didn't wear hats ever inside the building. So, no, they've got to learn not to wear a hat. And I'm like, really? We're gonna deal with that. We're gonna have a battle over a hat when they're coming from gang violence and all the issues they're coming, and we're gonna fight over a hat. And so we're thinking, how important really is a hat? Especially when you don't have enough relationship. So we learn to pick another battle. But to Mary's point was this other area is, but what happens when it's super important? A hat's not that big a deal. But what happens if it's more important? and you still don't have the relationship, and it's not it for you, what do you do? That area we call seek help. And seek help from somebody who does have a higher relationship. They have a whole lot more influence than you can possibly imagine, even in quick situations. And so we try to create a culture that our staff could say, hey, when you're not it, find somebody who is, and be okay with that. Because it has nothing to do with you. The acronym we used was Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. It's not about you. It's about them and their struggles. And so literally to the point where we had these little cups with Q-tips on them as reminders on the people's desks to say, it's not about you. You know, you're not it, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with what they're experiencing when they're around. Find somebody who helps you experience something different and be okay with that. And I get that that's hard sometimes. But then we started teaching staff about how do we pass on that influence. So when I had some influence, how to pass that on. So so a kid who wanted to wear a hat and say, hey, you know, I don't care if you wear a hat, right? We got a good relationship. Yeah, Mr. Rick, you got it. He said, hey, but you know, my mom, she's still on campus, and even though it's a rule, it's okay, she still doesn't like it. Would you do me a favor? When you're around my mom, would you mind taking off your hat? And most of them, I go, no problem, Mr. Rick, no big deal. I can pass on my influence if I understand intentionally the power that I have. And I can say that even as, hey, when you're in my class, but I hear there's another teacher saying, man, they're having a lot of problems with you. Do me a favor. When you're in their class, can you just kind of, and I can walk through, here's what I'd like you to do. For me, would you be willing to do it for our relationship? And most often if you got a strong relationship, then you got it. And I said, if you have any problems, don't raise that in class. Come talk to me. I can help you work it out. I got a pretty good relationship with that teacher. I can help you. You're not alone in this. Because now they feel like they've got somebody else that will help them meet their needs. So when you're not in it, that's important. Now, so when you have a higher relationship, and again, I'm telling you something that we take about 3 hours to teach, telling you about 3 minutes, but up here, what we call empower. Because you have a lot of influence, but it's still not that important. So let them make some decisions in a sense. We talk to you, empower them, say, hey, you know, it's up to you. Here's what I would do. I would like for you to not to wear a hat in these situations, but it really is up to you. Don't really care. But I just want you to know that I thank you for the relationship that we have, that I can tell you how I feel. And that can go a long ways, because sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't, and that's okay, because it's not that important. But it's building a relationship because they think, hey, this person's giving me some space, they're giving me some freedom, they're giving me some equity, you know, they're treating me like I'm worth something, and that has influence down the line. And there were plenty of times, here's what we call trauma-informed problem solving. It's a much more significant process, but the idea comes from when you have built enough relationship, you can pass that on vicariously, in a sense that you can say, for me, will you treat this person this way? When I have enough relationship, and when we've got a whole culture that does that, we were much smaller, obviously, than what the campus was, so we made sure that every staff member had at least, have 2 students that you're building a deeper relationship with. Because when it comes your time, and that's one of the things that we'll talk about tomorrow, is some of the strategies we would use. We had a one process that we had a little, an hourglass, kind of 8-timer hourglass. And so if a student would wild out in class, and that happened a lot, they had the opportunity to take care of that themselves, okay? So that you say, if you're just feeling triggered for whatever reason, you had the ability to leave, flip the hourglass, and you got, I think it was like 12.5 minutes. And you know, we'll give you a call, let, you know, either through the intercom system, let you know when your time's up. If you're feeling good, come back to class, no questions asked. If you need more time, then we'll send a person that can be there with you. But it was just a constant process within our structure that says, here's how we deal when somebody is dysregulated. If we have a plan to deal with that, it's a lot more beneficial. The thing that I was most frustrated with is that we didn't, people don't have a plan. We have plans for all kinds of things. You probably have a plan for fire drills. You know, I think you're mandated, I know you're mandated a lot to have so many fire drills and even active shooter drills. We've got these plans, but we don't have any plan to how to deal with people who are dysregulated. And that's what causes the most anxiety for other people. But we have no plan on how to deal with that. So what I do as part of, I love going into structures and teach them about how to develop just the meticulousness of a fire drill as how an emotional regulation drill. and have a plan of how we're gonna do it and teach to that plan so everybody knows, because it sends a message that says, we get it. People are gonna get dysregulated, but we're here to help. We're gonna come up with a plan and everybody on campus is gonna be a part of this and we'll have some solutions for you. We'll help you walk you through this. And we actually drilled, we had practices for emotional dysregulation drills. And so we had a signal. So when somebody, for us, it was this. Because we were taught about the brain, Dan Siegel had an idea that the brain is like this, the limbic system, and when you flip your lid, it exposes your emotional dysregulation. And so we use that as a signal that somebody flipped their lid. So when somebody is dysregulated, so we taught our students and our staff to recognize somebody's dysregulation and send the signal to the rest of the campus in a sense. So when you notice that, flip the lid, and then what do you do when you see the signal? So the first thing everybody else started with would do this. And the person that was most dysregulated didn't because they didn't care. And so you could figure out pretty easy that, but then we had a plan, what do you do? And it was a pretty involved plan, but first we had what we call regulation buddy. We would look for their regulation buddy. Who was the person that has the best relationship? That person go and you go off and do whatever you need to do because the teacher needs to go back to doing what they do. You can't take all the time you need to dysregulate somebody else or to regulate somebody else. And sometimes say, well, I gotta keep doing what I do. But regulation buddy, you go make this happen. And that was really, really powerful. And they had, and often because it was students and staff, when it was another student, that was so much more powerful. Because they could talk to him in ways that we couldn't. They could say things and had a better understanding sometimes of what was going on. We had no idea. So hey, was this about your phone call with your mom last night? Man, I heard that, I'm sorry. They can learn how to, and we did some teaching because they were a little younger. We taught them how to regulate somebody who's dysregulated. And when everybody knew that was part of what you did on campus, and we would teach that, hey, when the signal went off, that means somebody in the family, somebody in the campus is dysregulated. Let's figure out how to make this right so it doesn't spill into other areas. And so those are the kind of things that you can develop once you have an understanding of the science. And you have an understanding of the structures that say, somebody just can't stop, and always take the time to do that. But there's some people who can. And there's other students who'd be more than glad to do that at some times. It's like, well, they're literally, it probably doesn't manifest in the same way, but a lot of times when there's dysregulation that occurs and they bring it to the classroom, there's not a lot of learning that's gonna happen anyway at that point. They're gonna draw so much attention, they can draw so much attention that nobody's gonna learn anything anyway. So if you really want to, you gotta help people feel safe. And then often how you respond to that person who's dysregulated may trigger the other students. How you deal with that, because they're looking at you to say, how are you gonna deal with me when I get that way? And there's an issue of equity that could come up like, wait a minute, you're not treating that person fair. And now you've got other people who are triggered by how you handle one person or how you didn't handle one person. And likewise, if you don't do anything, well, you didn't do anything when this happened. You didn't protect me. And that's going to trigger other people. So having a plan, a strategy that is pervasive through your structure is the fruition of the whole framework. Got enough knowledge to know what threat is and what it's not, and what safety is and how they're pursuing that. And I've got enough insight to sometimes know what an individual needs in any given moment. And I've got some strategies that I can make sure we get it to this person when they need it, and a structure that will support it. That's not going to call me out if I do have to stop class early. And in order to help regulate that, everybody knows that, hey, that's what needs to happen. Or if I need to seek help, in this area. This was the biggest area of shame for some folks. They were like, oh gosh, if some people know I need help, they'll think I'm not a very good faculty member. It's like, if you just get over that, because they're probably in the same boat thinking that they need help sometimes too. And if it's just okay to seek help and everybody knows that, you all feel better. We're like, well, there's no shame if I need to call somebody and say, hey, I'm not the it person for this person, and I don't know why. Can you help? Well, yeah, I've got this. Let me talk to them for a little bit, and I'll go back and I'll make sure that I transfer some of my influence to you. When there's a structure and an ability to do so. So that's the hope of all this work, is to really start to understand that KISS framework, knowledge, insight, strategies, and structures. You've got to understand this knowledge first. And go looking. So when you start to come together and brainstorm some of the issues, start at the sensory input instead of the behavior. Because they'll change behaviors, if it's not working. But it's still, if you don't change the sensory input, that threat response is just gonna come out in another way. And it might come out even worse, because it's like, and nobody did anything about it. That's how they're gonna be feeling. I had this threat response, I wasn't feeling safe, and nobody did anything about it. When the rest of us were like, we didn't know. Do you think they're thinking that way? They know, in their mind, they're almost like, this is the comical thing that happens in my relationship early on, with my partner. I say, well, Rick, I just wanted you to know. I said, well, you didn't tell me. Well, if you just knew, how am I supposed to know? Well, you should. Okay, I'll figure out how to just know. That's how the other people are responding. They just want us to know. Now we can get a little more strategic and figure out, well, at least I can figure out it's a stress response, and I have enough information to say, I wonder if it's because of this or this. When the schedule changes, we all know when you're back from a new semester, some of the angst that happens as it gets close to finals. I mean, there's certain time that that their ability to manage and cope with things are going to be challenged a little bit more so. People appreciate when you're just aware of some of that. You can just acknowledge some of that. So part of that is that when you have enough knowledge and insight into what's going on for you. Maybe there's a student who, when school's out, that means they have to return to a household that may not be that safe, to a community that may not be that safe. And their greatest safety is here on campus. And unfortunately, they're doing exactly what they don't want to do is they're getting themselves kicked out of the campus as safe because their behavior is trying to do something to keep them safe. You're like, well, you're showing me that you don't want to be here. And the insider said, no, I don't want to leave. That's why I'm acting like this. With a little bit of insight, we can say, let's figure out what we can do. I can't always control where you go and what happens, but at least you got a partner in this that understands that we can figure this out. So I want to leave this last 7 minutes just to, any questions? We got the box here for anybody. We got one at the top. Maybe toss that up to you.
I'll catch it.
All right. Confidence, love that. All right.
Hello. I'm hoping that this makes sense because it's from what you were talking about maybe like 5 minutes ago. So you mentioned just being dysregulated and how we don't have a framework to like help someone who's dysregulated. So like my personal philosophy is that students, when they enter the classroom, they don't just leave all of like their personal stuff behind. They bring that with them into the classroom. I would say that that's also similar for like my own philosophy. So like sometimes when I come to work, like unfortunately, as much as I wish that I could just leave everything on the outside,
right?
Like I bring that into my work. So when it comes to staff members and faculty and whoever, but mostly staff members, but everyone, I guess, if you're feeling, what strategies like can we employ if we're feeling dysregulated when we know that we're in a space where like we can't show that we're being dysregulated, whether that's like our position or just the type of space that we're accessing or like the context of whatever that is. Do you have any suggestions?
Will you be here tomorrow?
Yes,
Okay.
for like the morning.
Okay, well, good. As soon as you get here, remind me right off the bat when if I ask the questions to talk about recognize. Okay?
I got you.
There's a strategy called recognize that we can help you. That would be a part of that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so that's what we'll try to do. I want to get real practical with some of the things that you can do now that you kind of understand this. But it will require you to say, what about this? What about this? So I can get more specific about that. Because we've all heard of that scenario where, well, leave your judgment at the door or all those kind of things. Yeah, right. That's not how the brain works. If we could, we would, but it can't because there's sensory input that is going to trigger that and it's going to start those connections of neurons and you can't leave your brain at the door. You have to take it with you and it's going to respond to what it responds to. So if we have a plan for how to do that, instead of just hoping that somebody can leave it at the door, I think we'll feel as though that we have greater agency over the situation. Any other questions? I shouldn't say I know there's questions. Any that someone's willing to give voice to? Yes, can we drop that?
Oh, I'm just gonna walk it down.
I don't. Are you saying you don't trust me?
No, I don't trust it. No.
Oh, okay, I got you.
I would imagine there's situations when an individual is getting that reward loop, but from a negative catalyst?
Yes, yes.
How do you, is that overcome by just individual relationships? Like, how do you show someone that you're getting a lot of good things from this reward cycle, but it's not good for your person?
Yes, if you have enough relationship, it's a little easier. If you don't have a relationship, good luck.
Right.
But it's, but we think about sometimes that negative loop is created by a positive situation. It's a good way to describe this. The scarcity loop, for example. There's an industry, a gambling industry that really preys upon the fact that we have a scarcity loop. In our evolutionary brain, resources were scarce. And we had to go out looking for food every single day. We don't do that anymore. We don't have to go look for our food every single day. But the scarcity is still there, and now our brain looks for something else that might need to help us to feel like that scarcity part of it is still needing to be used. And so gambling has created some incentive and some ways to create that scarcity loop that drives us to do something really beneficial for somebody else, but not always so beneficial for us. So sometimes we have to understand, is what they're doing beneficial for us because it helps keeps us safe? And so we're uncomfortable when they don't do it, or is it really something for them? And that's a lot harder than we think it is. Because quite often we don't like somebody doing something because it doesn't feel good for us. It may be exactly what they need to do. Somebody who needs to have their voice heard, but yet I don't want you to say it in my class because it disrupts, and so that's part of what we'll talk about when we start recognizing our own distress. Where does it really come from? Is it really that their behavior is doing something that's destructive for them, or are they doing something that's destructive for me? That I wish they would do something different. And our desires to control things to keep us comfortable have us doing some things that intervene so we can alleviate some of our guilt and shame in that. We will say that, oh, I'm doing it for the goodness of everybody else. When really is it, no, I just need you to not act that way for me. Understanding when we're doing that can help us out a lot. Because the equity detector in people's brains can see that. And they see like, wait a minute, they start thinking of manipulation. You're manipulating this person to get what you want. And it's not really about them. And now you have your relationship influence is going to drop with everybody watching you too. So you have to be really authentic about the fact that, and when you do just want it for you, to say that then. Be authentic about that and take your chances. Because if they think that you're trying to trick them, and I think they're going to be more suspicious of you. So we just have to be really, really careful that when we notice a behavior that we think that is unhelpful, who's it unhelpful for? Is it me? Is it others? Is it them? And be honest about that so they don't feel manipulated into doing something for our benefit. And that's why we use that. Quit taking it personally. It's not about you. Let go of all your desires, what you want. What does this person really need? What do they really want? What's really helpful for them? In a clinician's world, we've been talking about like motivational interviewing. It's a really big technique that a lot of clinicians use, but the way they use it is, and they teach you some of this, like iMessages. When you do this, I feel this. That's about you. And a lot of times people are like, I don't care about you. They're like, why does everything have to be about you? But we've been taught to say that, no, here's what I need to do. And it's like, that's the wrong thing to do in a lot of situations. If you've got a relationship, that's a great thing to do. We can say that, and it's expected. But if you've got somebody who's struggling and you go in there, hey, when you say that, you can't talk to me that way. They're like, I don't care about you. This isn't about you. You just have to understand, right? I just need to let them know that, no, I'm here for them. And I'm even willing to go through some uncomfortable stuff to help you. And that's what we call it, search for safety, not search for uncomfortableness. We weaponize safety. And people say, well, I'm unsafe. No. A lot of times you're just uncomfortable. And there is a big difference. There's a card game that I'm working on. It's called 52 Shades of Safety. And just help people say there's a, it's a spectrum. Don't act like you're under a life-threatening situation when you're just uncomfortable. That destroys a lot of safety for other people. You got your toes stepped on and you're acting like, World War III happened. No, you're just uncomfortable. There's some things you just need to get over and not claim it's a safety issue and go back, we got to do something about this because people are going to say, no. We can deal with some of that uncomfortableness. But that's hard. Because our brains are desired to keep us safe, and sometimes we think feeling uncomfortable is feeling unsafe. But it's not. Yes. Okay, in the interest of time, unfortunately, this has got to be my last comment.
Wow. So, I guess I just was hoping that tomorrow, we could maybe talk about some of those things of like sitting in that discomfort, right?
Mhm.
When I was a faculty member, I often taught things that felt really uncomfortable for students. That was the nature.
That's okay too.
But now in my new role here as the sexual violence prevention specialist, I'm sure that you guys could all imagine that there are sometimes really uncomfortable and also things that I would say do not feel psychologically safe necessarily that take place, right? Especially when someone is disclosing or something like that. And so I have always aimed when I was faculty and now in this new role, I've always aimed to cultivate a brave space and also to name that and to talk a bit more about that and talk about how it's okay to sit with some of that discomfort, especially when it's like, instead of the fight, flight, or freeze that maybe we're in a fawning, right? Like maybe we're just trying to please someone else and that we're responding in that way, that's something that's very normal. It's a biological need. And that may still kick in even if we're back in a physical space.
Sure.
And I was wondering if, as we go through this, we could talk a little bit about how to have some of that dialogue, not only in the classroom, but like in our offices and interactions with one another.
Yeah, so let's do this. I'm gonna let you go today. Tomorrow when you come in, if you are willing, we've got all this space up here. Grab some chalk and write down something you'd really like to be able to discuss in terms of your strategy. And I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. Because there's always gonna be more than we can ever do in a 3-hour period of time. But if those who are willing to put it to chalk, we'll at least start with those as a priority. But thank you for your time and attention today. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. So be well.